Chapter 3994. Is it going to end like this? Nietian looked at Xietian Ichi and Jiuqian Wanchuan and couldn't help but frown. He bitterly smiled in his heart. These people from the Pardon Sky clan had been using Nietian and the others from the beginning. Now that they no longer needed Nietian and the others to collect the sacred color rheumatism for them, they wanted to kick them away. Shi Tianluan, inform your people to immediately hand over the sacred color rheumatism and leave the ancestral land. Jiuqian Wanchuan said in a deep voice with a cold expression. Yes, Xia Tianluan replied. His figure flashed as he prepared to leave. Wait. Nietian stepped forward and called out to Shi Tianluan, wait. Shi Tianluan paused and turned to look at Nietian with a hint of disdain and hostility. He sneered and said, Does the high priest have any orders? Although he was calling the high priest, his expression was clearly saying, Do you really think you're the high priest? Lord Patriarch, Grand Elder. Nietian didn't pay any attention to Xie Tianluan. Instead, he looked at Xietian Ichi and Xietian Wanchuan and said with a smile, We're all here to take the test for the 5 academies. You and the 5 academies agreed to let us stay in the ancestral land for a month. It hasn't even been half a month, yet you're asking us to leave. What about the 5 academies test? What does this have to do with us? Jiuqian Wanchuan frowned and said in a cold tone. Nietian's expression darkened after hearing Jiuqian Wanchuan's words. He said, Grand Elder, you're the one who told us to come here. Now that you don't need us anymore, you're kicking us away. That's not appropriate, is it? Jiuqian Wanchuan sneered and said, What should we do then, High Priest? Nietian's eyes darkened, and he said, Perhaps the 5 academies test isn't important to you, but it's of utmost importance to the cultivators who entered the ancestral land. Therefore, I feel that since you invited us into the ancestral land, even if you don't need us anymore, you should at least ensure that we complete the 5 academies test out of respect. Is that so? Jiuqian Wanchuan frowned and responded with a sneer. Lord Patriarch, what do you think? Nietian's eyes darkened as he looked at Xietian and asked, Since the high priest has spoken, how can I refuse to give you any face? Xietian Ichi frowned. He then turned to an old man behind him and asked, 9th Elder, where do you think we can let these foreign cultivators complete the test? Lord Patriarch, I can't think of anything right now. The 9th Elder, a short and stout old man, said with an awkward expression. Patriarch, I think the Moon Forest is not bad. At this time, Aoyan Shigu suddenly stepped forward and said, Moon Forest? Xietian Ichi frowned, seemingly hesitant. Lord Patriarch, the Shadow Moon Forest is indeed a good place to go. Shi Tianluan's eyes flashed with a hint of shrewdness as she stepped forward and said. Xietian Ichi's eyes narrowed as he glanced at Jiuqian Wanchuan and asked, What does Grand Elder think? Lord Patriarch, the Shadow Moon Forest is indeed a good place. It's very suitable for these young foreign warriors. Jiuqian Wanchuan faintly smiled and replied, All right, then let them go to the Shadow Moon Forest. Xietian Ichi nodded his head and turned to Shi Tianluan. Shi Tianluan, you will still be in charge of the following matters. If you need any help, ask the 1st Elder directly. Yes, Lord Patriarch, Shi Tianluan replied as the corner of her lips curled up. She seemed extremely cold and murderous. Nietian frowned slightly. Although he didn't know what kind of place the Shadow Moon Forest was, judging from the expressions of Aoyan Shigu and Shi Tianluan, it was definitely not a good place. Moreover, Aoyan Shigu and Shi Tianluan's eyes were filled with murderous intent. It seemed that these 2 fellas still wanted to kill Nietian. Lord Patriarch, let's talk about the test first. Nietian didn't mind and looked at Xietian Ichi with a smile. Next, let's talk about the holy rheumatism. Holy rheumatism? Xietian Ichi frowned and couldn't understand. Nietian smiled and said, Before entering the ancestral ground, I made a deal with Aoyan Shigu. If I find more than 10 bottles of holy rheumatism, I can take away all the remaining holy rheumatism. Now that I've found the sacred bloodline of rheumatism, there are far more than 10 bottles of holy rheumatism. After saying this, Nietian looked at Aoyan Shigu with a playful expression. Aoyan Shigu frowned, and his expression instantly turned ugly. He didn't expect that Nye Tian was still thinking about this matter after becoming the great priest of Xietian. Out Yin Chigu, is this true? Xietian Ichi's expression darkened, and his eyes were like sharp blades as he looked at Out Yin Chigu cold. Yes. Out Yin Chigu's expression turned even uglier, but he didn't dare to deny it and could only nod. Xietian Ichi's expression darkened, and he was speechless. If he were to follow the deal, would he let Nye Tian take away the entire rheumatism sacred bloodline? Great priest, how can you take a kid's joke seriously? At this moment, Zhuqian Wangchuan stood up and smiled. Joke? Nye Tian also smiled and looked at Out Yin Chigu with a dark gaze. Out Yin Chigu, was our deal just a joke? I've won. If you won, I wouldn't be able to stand and talk anymore. Out Yin Chigu's face stiffened, unable to utter a word. High Priest, you're already a member of the Pardon Heaven clan. Why do you have to be so calculative? Pardon Heaven looked at Nye Tian curiously and forced a smile, haggling over every ounce. Nye Tian laughed and said, Chief, what I care about is the entire rheumatism sacred bloodline. This. Xietian Ichi's face stiffened. This guy really wanted the rheumatism saint bloodline. High Priest, don't go overboard. Zhuqian Wangchuan's expression darkened. It's true that you found a rheumatism saint vein, but it's very important to the Pardon Sky clan. If you really want the rheumatism saint vein, then I have reason to suspect that you, Pardon Sky clan, are too big. Aren't the priests competent? After saying that, Zhuqian Wangchuan's eyes turned cold, and his whole body emitted a restrained, killing intent. Great Elder, there's no need to threaten me. Nye Tian was not surprised by Zhuqian Wangchuan's reaction. He smiled faintly and said, Of course, I wouldn't dare to target the saint bloodline of rheumatism, but I have a small condition. The agreement between me and Out Yin Chigu can be voided, but this time, all warriors must collect holy rainbow flows. Yin, all of it belongs to me. As he spoke, Nye Tian's eyes flickered, and he glanced at Xietian Ichi and Zhuqian Wangchuan before he said, Lord Patriarch and Grand Elder probably won't refuse this condition, right? Xietian Ichi and Zhuqian Wangchuan frowned, and their expressions changed at the same time. Surprise appeared in their eyes, and they nodded at the same time, agreeing to Nye Tian's request. Chapter 3995. The 7 bones of pardoning heaven stared at Nye Tian with incomparably grim eyes that were filled with killing intent. He didn't expect Xietian Ichi and Zhuqian Wangchuan to agree to Nye Tian's harsh conditions. Indeed, in other people's eyes, Nye Tian's conditions were too much. However, the sacred rainbow rheumatism that he requested was nothing compared to the entire rheumatism sacred bloodline. Nye Tian had the identity of Xietian High Priest after all. Xietian Ichi and Zhuqian Wangchuan were still a little afraid of him. After all, Ancestor Shui Luo's words were not to be trifled with. Thank you, Lord Clan Leader and Great Elder. Nye Tian could feel Out Yin Chigu's murderous intent, but he didn't care. He pretended not to know and smiled at Xietian Ichi and Zhuqian Wangchuan. In that case, let's end things here and bring everyone to the Moon Forest. Zhuqian Wangchuan said in a deep voice. He couldn't wait to get these outsiders to leave the ancestral land. Yes. 9th Elder Xietian Zhen and new Elder Shi Tianluan answered at the same time and left. Out Yin Chigu, accompany the High Priest and the rest to the Moon Forest. Xietian Ichi frowned and looked at Out Yin Chigu. Yes, pardoning heaven, 7 bones agreed, and a cold aura flashed across his face. Let's go. Nye Tian didn't react. He just smiled and said to Mori Shire. Mori Shire nodded and left with Nye Tian with Out Yin Chigu. Lord Clan Leader, Out Yin Chigu's murderous intent just now seems like he still wants to kill our High Priest. Zhuqian Wangchuan frowned as he watched Nye Tian and the other 2 leave. Even Nye Tian could feel Out Yin Chigu's murderous intent. Xietian Ichi and Zhuqian Wangchuan obviously noticed it too. Isn't that great? Xietian Ichi smiled with a strange expression. He seemed to be anticipating something. Lord Clan Leader, this kid is someone the Ancestor has chosen. It won't be good if something happens to him. Jyotian Wanchuan's face darkened with worry. Xietian Ichi's lips twitched. If he can't even handle the Moon Forest and Aoyin Shigu, what right does he have to be great priest? That's true. Jyotian Wangchuan nodded. He immediately understood what Xietian Ichi meant. Xietian Ichi wanted to use Aoyin Shigu to test Nietian. If Nietian really died in the Moon Forest, it would only prove that Ancestor Shueluo had chosen the wrong person. Nietian and Mori Shire followed Aoyin Shigu and quickly left the ancestral sacred ground. They did not return to the All Heavens sacred world. Instead, they arrived at an unfamiliar world. Nietian and Mori Shire did not say anything. They only followed behind Aoyin Shigu. Nietian, do you know what kind of place the Shadow Moon Forest is? On the way, the eyes of the 7 bones of parting heaven flickered as he asked with a cold smile. Nietian smiled faintly and asked, "What place?" The Moon Forest is one of the forbidden areas of our Pardon Sky clan. It's also a place for our clan's juniors to train. Pardoning Heaven 7 Bones' lips curled into a smile as he said, "There are many fierce beasts in the Dark Moon Forest, and there are also many killing formations left behind from the ancient times. You must be careful. You must be careful." "Thanks for the reminder," Nietian replied with a smile. "Of course. After all, you're the great priest of our Pardon Sky clan. It wouldn't be good if you died in the Moon Forest." Aoyin Shigu's gaze swept across Nietian with killing intent. Nietian frowned and smiled. "Aoyin Shigu, you don't hide at all. It seems that you still want to kill me." He was surprised that Aoyin Shigu did not hide his killing intent at all. He even purposely revealed it. "Umph." Aoyin Shigu sneered and said, "Nietian, you don't think that I'll let you live after you killed a member of our Pardon Sky clan, one against me, and embarrass me in front of everyone, right? If you think so, then you're too naive." Nietian's gaze darkened. He then smiled and said, "Aoyin Shigu, aren't you afraid that the clan leader and the first elder will blame you for killing me? How would they not know that I want to kill you?" Aoyin Shigu sneered and said, "They didn't stop you from entering the Moon Forest. This means that they've given me permission to kill you. Is that so?" Nietian laughed and said, "Are you sure they're not using you to test me?" "So what?" Aoyin Shigu was smart. He laughed and said, "If you die in the Moon Forest, it only proves that the ancestor was wrong about you." Nietian smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Aoyin Shigu was smarter than he thought. It seems that the Moon Forest will not be easy. About half an hour later, Aoyin Shigu and Nietian arrived at a dark forest. "This is the Shadow Moon Forest. Let's wait here first." Pardoning Heaven 7 Bones stopped in his tracks and said solemnly. Nietian and Mori Shire nodded. They could feel the murderous intent from Aoyin Shigu at any time. They were even worried that Aoyin Shigu would suddenly attack. Indeed, Aoyin Shigu wanted to kill Nietian and Mori Shire. Moreover, he was very confident in his current strength. After all, he had just broken through to the Heavenly Tribulation King Sage realm. However, Nietian and Mori Shire had not entered the Moon Forest yet. If they died, it would be troublesome. Aoyin Shigu was very confident that he could kill Nietian and Mori Shire. Therefore, he was not in a hurry. Half a day later, the 9th Elder, Xie Tianjin, and Xie Tianluan appeared. Behind them were close to 100 Paragon Heaven Clan martial practitioners, as well as the martial practitioners participating in the test. They formed a dense black mass that shrouded the sky above the Dark Moon Forest. "They're here," Aoyin Shigu said. He moved and stepped into the sky. Nietian and Mori Shire immediately followed. "High Priest, this is your sacred rheumatism." At this moment, Xie Tianjin's eyes trembled. He extended his hand and gave Nietian a space-time ring. "Thank you, 9th Elder." Nietian took the space-time ring and used his divine sense to sense it. He could not help but smile in surprise when he found that there were 8,000 to 9,000 bottles of sacred rheumatism. He did not expect the martial artist to collect so many bottles of sacred rheumatism in such a short time. "Nietian, don't forget our agreement." Mori Shire glanced at Nietian and reminded him with a faint smile. "Of course, half of these sacred rheumatism are yours. Yet Tion smiled calmly. Of course, he remembered the agreement between him and Mori Shire. Moreover, he was able to discover the sacred bloodline of rheumatism and the heart of rheumatism, thanks to Mori Shire. Chapter 3996. Tion did not hesitate at all. He immediately gave half of the sacred rheumatism to Mori Shire. Tion, you're quite generous. Mori Shire could not help but chuckle as he kept the message. He did not expect Tion to give him the sacred rheumatism immediately. He thought that he would only be able to obtain the sacred rheumatism after returning to the all-heaven sacred world. The most important thing for us to cooperate is mutual trust and mutual benefit. Tion smiled and said, I'm inviting you to travel with me in the Dark Moon Forest. You won't reject me, right? It would be impolite to refuse. Mori Shire chuckled. Tion's suggestion was exactly what he wanted. The two of them were smart. They obviously knew that they were targets that Aoyin Chigu wanted to kill. And the strength of the two of them, when compared to the part in Heaven's Seven Bones, was not just a little bit inferior. If they were split up, there would only be one outcome for either of them if they encountered Aoyin Chigu alone: death. As long as they stayed together, they might have a chance of survival. Now that their strength had increased, the resonance between their hearts would definitely increase. Even someone as powerful as Aoyin Chigu would be wary of them. Shi Tianlun looked at Tion and said with a cold smile, Great move, High Priest. You managed to obtain so much sacred rheumatism so easily. His voice was very loud. It was obvious that he wanted everyone to hear him. High Priest. The cultivators' expressions changed when they heard Shi Tianluan's words. They were all stunned. They never thought that Tion would become the High Priest of the Pardoning Sky clan. What happened? How did this brat become the High Priest? Is he really the High Priest of the Pardoning Sky clan? Isn't he here to participate in the test like us? What happened? Why can't I understand anything? The crowd was in an uproar as they discussed. Pardoning Heaven Seven Bones' lips curled into a cold smile when he saw this. He immediately took a step forward and said in a loud voice, Everyone, listen up. This silver-haired cultivator called Tion is now the High Priest of our Pardoning Sky clan. It's really the High Priest of the Pardoning Sky clan. The crowd exclaimed. Tion also frowned and looked at Pardoning Heaven's Seven Bones with a gloomy expression, waiting to see what the latter was going to do. However, then, Aoyin Chigu said, Even if Tion is the High Priest of the Pardoning Sky, he will still have to participate in the test and will face the same danger as all of you. Furthermore, he has the holy color-flowing flame that all of you have collected before, so he is the only one who possesses it. The danger he will face may be greater than all of you. The crowd frowned and could not help but be stunned. They felt that Aoyin Chigu's tone was a little strange, as if he was reminding them of something. Since it's a test, there will naturally be risks. I hope our High Priest can walk out of the Dark Moon Forest alive. Aoyin Chigu smiled coldly and stared at Tion with a murderous gaze. Tion's expression was calm, without the slightest ripple. How could he not tell that Aoyin Chigu was reminding everyone that he had the sacred rheumatism? Just the sacred rheumatism alone would arouse the killing intent of many people. Everyone, you have done well. The Dark Moon Forest test will last for half a month. The rules are very simple. As long as you can walk out of the Dark Moon Forest alive, you will pass. At this moment, Shi Tianluan took a step forward and said in a clear voice, During the test, you can take away anything you obtain, including the sacred rheumatism. You can take them all, including the sacred rainbow, flowing flame. His last sentence was obviously added on purpose. Everyone's eyes trembled as they fixed their gazes on Tion. Among everyone present, Tion's body had the sacred rheumatism that everyone had collected. Shi Tianluan's words were basically encouraging everyone, telling them that they could kill Tion and snatch the sacred rheumatism from him. Tion, these two fellas are working together seamlessly. Mori Shire, who was standing beside Tion, frowned and said with a bitter smile, He even regretted taking the sacred rheumatism now. If he did not have the sacred rheumatism, his enemy would only be Aoyin Chigu. But now he had so much sacred rheumatism on him, he was afraid that everyone would want to kill him. Seems like the Yin Moon Forest will be fun this time. Nie Tian laughed. His face was gloomy. Now, everyone split up and prepared to enter the Yin Moon Forest. Then, Shi Tianluan's eyes flashed with a cold light, and he said loudly. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone split up into groups of 3 to 5 and covered the sky above the Yin Moon Forest. Enter, Shi Tianluan ordered, and everyone moved at the same time. Like flying fishes, they dove into the Yin Moon Forest. Nie Tian and Morishire moved at the same time and rushed into the dark Yin Moon Forest. The moment they entered the Shadow Moon Forest, they immediately felt a frightening restrictive power. It was as if an invisible giant hand had firmly imprisoned them. Morishire frowned, and his face sank. Our luck is so bad. Nie Tian's face changed, and he said coldly. Previously, Aoyin Chigu said that there were many killing arrays in the Yin Moon Forest that were left behind from the immemorial era. At this moment, Nie Tian and Morishire seemed to be trapped by a kind of restrictive force. How could they have thought that they would be trapped the moment they entered the Yin Moon Forest? Damn it! Morishire let out a low roar. His body moved slightly, and he wanted to force his way out of the restrictive force. Don't move recklessly. But at this moment, Nie Tian shouted anxiously. What's wrong? Morishire's expression turned sluggish. He was so scared that his whole body stiffened, and he did not dare to move. This is a killing array. We can't force our way in. Nie Tian frowned and said in a low voice. His forehead was covered with beads of sweat, and his eyes were trembling. It was obvious that he was very nervous. A killing array? Morishire's face sank, and his nerves immediately tightened. If this was an immemorial killing array, it would be terrible. Morishire carefully sensed the force in the air. At this time, Nie Tian's face was tense, and he said in a low voice. Morishire nodded his head and immediately spread out his divine sense. Then his face stiffened. He discovered that there was a mysterious force in the air around him. It was slowly gathering and gradually formed into a sharp blade that surrounded him and Nie Tian. Chapter 3997. Yin Blades 9. Slaughtering Formation. Aoyin Chigu's face darkened, and his eyes were as cold as ice, giving off a feeling that one had fallen into an ice cellar. Nie Tian and Morishire's expressions changed at the same time as their hearts screamed in their hearts. They had just entered the killing formation, and they had already encountered Aoyin Chigu. Misfortune never comes alone. Nie Tian, don't worry. I won't interfere. Once you're trapped in the Yin Blades 9 slaughtering formation, you'll definitely die. Aoyin Chigu smiled coldly and said, I only need to stand aside and watch you struggle before you die. The Dark Moon Forest was a training ground for the younger generations of the Parting Sky clan. There were many forbidden grounds in the forest that no one was allowed to enter. The Yin Blades 9 slaughtering formation was one of them. Before the younger generation of the Parting Sky clan entered the Yin Moon Forest, they would be warned about the places they could go and the places they couldn't. In the history of the Parting Sky clan, many cultivators had fallen into the Yin Blades 9 slaughtering formation, but none of them had ever survived. At this moment, Aoyin Chigu was like a hunter looking at Nie Tian and Morishire with admiration, as if they were beasts trapped in a cage. Nie Tian's gaze sharpened slightly as his expression turned cold. He ignored the 7 bones of pardoning heaven and actively communicated with the little fat cat. Nie Tian, this killing formation is a little troublesome. Give me some time, don't act recklessly. Fat Cat said in a deep voice with a slight tremble, obviously extremely nervous. The Yin Blades 9 slaughtering formations framework was extremely huge. It was definitely a high-level ancient killing formation. Fortunately, some of the formation runes of the Yin Blades 9 slaughtering formation had been destroyed. Otherwise, Nie Tian and Morishire would have been devoured by the formation the moment they entered it. Even so, they could not afford to be careless. At this moment, Nietion and Morishire would be consigned to eternal damnation if they made one wrong move. Nietion, what should we do? Morishire's forehead was dripping with sweat. He was clearly panicking as he asked in a trembling voice. He had never been so nervous in front of outsiders. This was the first time. He had done some research on formations. Although he couldn't see the framework of the Een Blade 9 kills, the killing intent that forced his heart to tremble. Don't move, Nietion replied solemnly. Although he looked calm on the surface, he was extremely nervous in his heart. His knowledge of formations was limited, so he could only rely on Fat Cat and the Ghost Emperor. Nietion and Morishire stood in the middle of the array, not moving an inch. Audiobook was stunned by the sight. He did not expect the two of them to be so calm. Nietion, try to exit the array according to this route. After a while, Fat Cat's voice was heard. Then, a formation route appeared in Nietion's divine sense. Okay, Nietion agreed and looked at Morishire. The latter nodded knowingly. Then, Nietion took a deep breath and took a step forward carefully. The moment he lifted his foot, his heart was in his throat, afraid that he would encounter a terrifying killing intent in the next moment. Fortunately, the formation did not react, and it was very safe. Seems like this route is correct. Nietion took the first step. Fat Cat exclaimed in surprise. Nietion nodded. Only then did he realize that his whole body was drenched in cold sweat. Then, he sped up and walked forward for more than 10 meters. The entire formation was very stable, and there were no abnormalities. How is this possible? Witnessing this scene, Audiobook shrieked in disbelief. The killing array of the 9 Een Blades. Even their clan leader's array master had to be careful when dealing with it. How could Nietion walk out of it? Could it be that Nietion was an array master? However, this was simply impossible. The Tao of array formations was somewhat different from the Tao of martial arts. Talent alone was far from enough. One also needed a wealth of experience and an understanding of various spiritual materials. Nietion was so young, it was impossible for him to be an array master. Nietion, it seems like I have underestimated you. Seeing that Nietion and Morishire were about to walk out of the killing array of the 9 Een Blades, Audiobook could no longer sit still. He spoke with a gloomy face, and his eyes were cold. It seems like I have to do it myself. Then, Audiobook smiled coldly. His chi surged out of his body like a roar of thunder. The void around him rumbled. Boom! In the next moment, he threw out a palm towards Nietion and Morishire. Oh no! Nietion and Morishire could feel the oppressive force coming towards them. Their expressions changed, and they screamed. To them, Audiobook's attack was not fatal. It was the killing intent that was triggered by the attack that was the most terrifying. Kaboom! After that, the enormous palm descended onto the formation. Instantly, a violent explosion resounded out as the entire formation sank. After that, a tremendous amount of formation energy appeared and directly devoured the palm. Boom! 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 In the next moment, 9 giant blades appeared in the void. They were like 9 sharp swords, and every single one of them was filled with boundless killing intent. 9 Een Blade. Pardoning Heaven's 7 bones, eyes lit up when he saw this, and he could not help but exclaim. His attack had successfully triggered the killing intent of the array. Nietion and Morishire were dead for sure. Nietion charge. At the moment of life and death, Fat Cat and Ghost Monarch yelled at the same time. Follow me. Nietion's eyes flickered as he let out a deep roar. Following this, he stomped the ground and summoned a pair of astral wings on his back. His figure was like a giant bird spreading its wings as he sprang into the sky and dashed towards the 9 giant blades. Morishire reacted swiftly and followed closely behind Nietion. Their figures sprang into the sky and dashed past the 9 giant blades as they exited the array. Bang! 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 At that instant, the 9 giant blades landed on the ground, causing the ground to rumble and dust to rise into the air. Nietion and Armageddon couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air, fear lingering in their hearts as they looked down at the scene below. If they had been any slower, they would have died without a corpse left. They had dashed straight towards the 9 blades and escaped through the gaps between the blades. It was an extremely dangerous experience. However, they had only managed to avoid the 9 blades from the front, but were still injured by the remaining force. At that moment, both of their bodies were covered in bloody wounds, as if they were made of blood. How is this possible? At this moment, Pardoning Heaven's 7 Bones saw that Nie Tian and Li Wuyo had actually charged out of the killing formation. His eyes widened in shock as he let out a strange cry. Not even in his wildest dreams did he think that Ling Chun would be able to escape from the array under such circumstances. Chapter 3998. Nie Tian and Mori Shire stood high up in the sky. Feeling the murderous intent from Ao Yin Chigu, their expressions changed at the same time. Ao Yin Chigu was already a tough opponent. Now that he had successfully broken through to the Heavenly Tribulation King Sage Realm, his combat power was far stronger than before. As for Nie Tian and Mori Shire, although their strength had also broken through, there was no qualitative improvement. In addition, they were heavily injured. Would they be a match for Ao Yin Chigu? Blood slaughter. At this moment, Ao Yin Chigu roared. He was like a raging beast. His aura was like a volcanic eruption, sweeping everything in its path. Boom, boom, boom. In an instant, endless waves of blood rolled in the void, pressing towards Nie Tian and Mori Shire. The whole world seemed like it was about to be torn apart. Nie Tian and Mori Shire looked at each other and moved at the same time. The Sky Sword and the Grim Reaper Scythe were wielded at the same time. A dark sword shadow appeared in the void, like an ancient giant beast, rushing towards the endless waves of blood. Their strength was too far apart from Ao Yin Chigu. Their only chance was to use the dual heart resonance. Boom! In the next moment, the two extreme powers collided, causing the heavens and earth to rumble. An endless amount of explosive power appeared, rampaging through the void. Nie Tian and Mori Shire trembled at the same time and retreated thousands of meters away. Ao Yin Chigu, on the other hand, only swayed a little before stabilizing himself. It was obvious that even the dual heart resonance could not fight against the current Ao Yin Chigu. Mori Shire stabilized his body. Before he could speak, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His martial body was not as strong as Nie Tian's. Under such a terrifying impact, it was normal for him to be injured. Are you okay? Nie Tian's face was also pale, but it was much better than Mori Shire's. I won't die, Mori Shire replied with a bitter smile on his face. It was true that he couldn't die now, but what about next? 2 ants, you two are surprising me more and more. Ao Yin Chigu took a step forward. His aura was extremely imposing as he stood high up in the sky. He was like a bloody mountain, swallowing everything in his path. He had not expected that Nie Tian and Mori Shire would be able to block one of his attacks after he had broken through to the Heavenly Tribulation Sage King realm. The next move will take your lives. Ao Yin Chigu's eyes flashed coldly as he spoke in a low voice. The violent blood waves around him swayed in the void. His monstrous aura deterred everything. Let's go all out. Nie Tian and Mori Shire's eyes trembled. They looked at each other with unyielding determination in their eyes. Although Nie Tian did not have a good impression of Mori Shire, he felt that this person was somewhat gloomy and shrewd. His motives were unknown. However, he had to admit that there were many similarities between him and Mori Shire. For example, in the face of a powerful opponent, they were both unyielding and unyielding. Boom, boom. In the next moment, their bodies shook at the same time. Blood chi soared into the sky, and the surrounding space was shrouded in the smell of blood. Burning blood chi? Ao Yin Chigu's expression changed slightly. The corners of his mouth curled into a murderous smile. However, his eyes revealed a trace of nervousness. No matter how arrogant he was, he knew that Nie Tian and Mori Shire's joint attack of burning blood chi was a test for him. Sacred heaven-defying sword. Heaven and earth unite. Yin and yang combine. At this moment, Nyetian raised the sky, sword in his hand high. The move of heaven and earth unite pushed the sword aura around him to the peak, erupting with unprecedented craziness. Grim Reaper Scythe, sacrificial soul kill. At the same time, Maury Shire spoke in a cold tone. The Grim Reaper Scythe slashed across the void. Suddenly, an extremely dark, evil aura appeared, like a dark cloud, shrouding the sword in the sky. Hum. Then, the dark giant sword let out a low, sword hum like a mad dragon. The power to pierce through the clouds and crack rocks seemed to be able to destroy everything. These two guys can actually do this. Aotian Chigu's eyes trembled in horror. Obviously, he did not expect that the move of Nyetian and Maury Shire's blood chi to be so terrifying. Come on. However, the next moment, he let out a roar. His eyes instantly turned crimson. He seemed to have gone mad, and his whole body emitted a terrifying aura. Blood luo, heaven devouring. Then, outside of Aotian Chigu's body, waves of blood billowed into the sky. The terrifying force of the impact was like a raging tsunami, stirring violently. Then, a blood wave windstorm appeared. The imposing aura engulfed everything. Kaboom! In the next moment, the dark giant sword and the blood wave windstorm collided. A deafening roar sounded between heaven and earth. An endless amount of energy surged out and spread wildly in all directions. Nyetian and Maury Shire were hit by the impact and were sent flying. As for Aotian Chigu, he was also retreating frantically. He could not withstand the violent force coming from the front. At this moment, Aotian Chigu seemed to have sensed something. His eyes trembled slightly, and he let out a cry of surprise. Puff! He moved his body slightly to the side. Then a golden ray of light whizzed past and brushed past his chest, leaving a wound on his body that was so deep that his bones could be seen. Blood instantly dyed half of his body red. Bang! At this moment, his body shuddered violently. Instantly, he was hit by the violent force and fell straight to the ground. On the other hand, Nyetian and Maury Shire retreated 10,000 meters away before they managed to stabilize themselves. However, their bodies were already riddled with holes. Their bodies were covered in blood, a terrifying sight to behold. Maury Shire, how are you feeling? Nyetian's eyes flickered and asked in a deep voice. Maury Shire's body was trembling. He could not even stand straight and had no energy to speak. His martial body was too weak compared to Nyetian's. It was a miracle that he was still alive after being hit by such a violent force. Eyebrows furrowed, he glanced at the 7 heaven-pardoning bones on the ground, and then, without the slightest hesitation, left with Armageddon. Trying to escape, Aotian Chigu's eyes flickered. He let out a deep roar and tried to chase after them. However, he spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face turned pale. Damn it! He roared like a wild beast, his eyes looking around, trying to find the person who had just ambushed him. If not for the golden ray of light, he would not have been so severely injured. At the same time, Nyetian and Maury Shire were running for their lives. Maury Shire had already fainted. Nyetian had to find a safe place to rest as soon as possible. At this moment, Nyetian sensed an aura. His lips twitched, and he said calmly, "Your Highness, come out." Nyetian, how did you know it was me? Then, a beautiful figure in white appeared. It was the Heaven Saintess of the Heaven Sacred Pavilion. Chapter 3999. Nyetian, you already knew it was me? The Heaven Saintess landed next to Nyetian and asked with a frown. She was surprised that Nyetian was still able to detect her, even though she hid her aura so perfectly. I guessed it. Nyetian smiled faintly and said, "If it weren't for Her Highness, we wouldn't have been able to escape so easily. Indeed, if it was just Nyetian and Maury Shire alone, they wouldn't have been able to fight against the Aotian Chigu even after burning their vitality. Fortunately, the Heaven Saintess attack heavily injured the Aotian Chigu. Otherwise, the Aotian Chigu wouldn't have let them go. You saved me once, and I saved you once. We're even now," the Heaven Saintess said with a cold expression. "Your Highness Saintess, If I'm not mistaken, you've been lurking there for a long time, right? Nyetian said with a playful smile. What are you trying to say? The heaven saintess frowned and asked coldly. What I want to say is, from the moment I entered the Shadow Moon Forest, Your Highness Saintess has been following me. Nyetian smiled again and said, Your Highness Saintess saved me not just to repay my kindness, right? The heaven saintess frowned a little, as if she was a little embarrassed, but she still maintained her cold attitude. You're all heavily injured, so I can protect you for now. What's the condition? Nyetian asked in a deep voice. Why do you have to say it if you know? The heaven's saintess expression sank as she spoke in a cold tone. Holy rheumatism, right? Nyetian asked with a smile. How much? He could tell that the heaven's saintess saving them wasn't as simple as it seemed. For the saintess of heaven to appear in such a timely manner and deal a fatal blow to Aoyin Shigu, it was obvious that she had been observing for a long time, waiting for a suitable opportunity. Under such circumstances, there was only one explanation. The saintess of heaven had been following Nyetian and Mori Shire. The heaven saintess was definitely not following Nyetian to repay his kindness. She had other motives. If there was anything on Nyetian and Mori Shire that could interest the Sky Saintess, it could only be holy rheumatism. Nyetian had already guessed this, but he wanted the Saintess of Heaven to say it herself. The Pardoning Sky clan gave you all the sacred rheumatism that we collected in the sacred ancestral grounds, right? The Saintess of Heaven frowned slightly, and her beautiful eyes flickered with undisguised desire. Even though she was a Saintess of Heaven, she couldn't hold herself back under the temptation of a treasure like holy rheumatism. Yes, Nyetian smiled faintly. He had already guessed that the Saintess of Heaven would say this. How much? The Saintess of Heaven continued to ask. How much do you want? Nyetian smiled faintly and asked back. He obtained over 9,000 bottles of holy rheumatism from the Pardoning Sky clan and gave half to Mori Shire, so he still had over 4,000 bottles left. To him, this was an immeasurable wealth. Holy rheumatism was something that could improve a cultivator's bloodline. The disciples of major factions in the all-heaven sacred world would definitely be willing to pay a great price for something like holy rheumatism. Therefore, even the Saintess of Heaven had to humble herself before Nyetian. The Saintess of Heaven clearly wanted to know just how much holy rheumatism Nyetian had so that she could state a price. However, Nyetian wasn't that stupid. He wouldn't show his trump card just for someone to rip him off. The Saintess of Heaven didn't say anything. She only raised a finger. 1. Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly. He smiled. Isn't it a little too easy for someone of your highness status to become someone's guard for just one bottle of holy rheumatism? I said 100 bottles. The Saintess of Heaven frowned cold. 100 bottles? Nyetian was taken aback. He then smiled. So your highness isn't underestimating yourself. You're asking for an exorbitant price. The heaven saintess sneered. Nyetian, you obtained at least 1,000 bottles of Saint Rheumatism from the Pardoning Heaven tribe, right? I'm only asking for 100 bottles, which is already very cheap for you. With the two of you in your current state, not to mention a powerhouse like Aoyi and Shigu, even a few Tiani experts would not be able to defeat you. Sage, I'm afraid that all of you will lose your lives. Nyetian's eyes trembled slightly. He chuckled and said, So your highness knows that I can't refuse, which is why you asked for 100 bottles of sacred rheumatism. 100 bottles of sacred rheumatism was indeed a lot. However, the premise was that the Saintess of Heaven thought that Nyetian only had 1,000 bottles of sacred rheumatism. If she knew that Nyetian actually obtained close to 10,000 bottles of sacred rheumatism from the Pardoning Heaven tribe, she would probably ask for 1,000 bottles. Nyetian and Mori Shire were both severely injured. Just as the Saintess said, any two Tiani sages would be able to kill them. Therefore, Nyetian had no choice but to accept the Saintess' suggestion. Nyetian, do you agree? The Saintess saw the playful expression on Nyetian's face. She seemed to be worried that the latter would not agree, so she asked in a deep voice. Since your highness has spoken, of course I agree. Nyetian smiled faintly and said, However, I have a condition that I hope your highness can agree to. Speak. The saintess was cold and straightforward. In the following period of time in the Shadow Moon Forest, I want the saintess to follow me closely until I walk out of the Shadow Moon Forest alive. Tian faintly smiled, his face calm. Sure. The saintess frowned and agreed without hesitation. Thank you. Tian smiled faintly and took out 100 bottles of sacred rheumatism. He threw them to the saintess and said with a smile, Given your highness status, you won't refuse to do what you want, right? Don't worry, I will do what I say. The saintess took the bottles of sacred rheumatism and said after confirming that there were no problems with them. That's good. Tian smiled faintly and glanced at the sleeping Mori Shire. The corner of his mouth could not help but twitch. He would not hand over the 100 bottles of sacred rheumatism. When Mori Shire woke up, he would take it back from him and double the price. Let's go. Tian smiled faintly and flew forward with Mori Shire. About half an hour later, Tian made sure that no one was following them, so he found a remote valley and entered it. Both he and Mori Shire were seriously injured and needed to rest immediately. Tian and the others entered the valley and first checked to make sure that there was nothing out of the ordinary. They then sat down and rested. In the blink of an eye, half a day later, Tian stood up. His aura had mostly recovered. Mori Shire's aura had also stabilized, but he was still unconscious. Tian. At that moment, the saintess' voice was heard. There was a hint of nervousness in her voice, as if she had discovered something. Chapter 4000. Tian frowned as he looked up at the cliff, and his expression flickered. On top of the cliff, a giant serpent was coiled. Its huge body was like a huge relief sculpture covering the mountain. At this moment, the giant snake's eyes were staring at Tian and the sky saintess, releasing a bone-chilling coldness. When did this big guy appear? I didn't notice it before. Tian's expression suddenly changed, and his heart sank. He had clearly checked the valley and didn't find anything. He really didn't know when this giant snake appeared. At that moment, the Holy Daughter of Heaven said to Tian in a deep voice, This giant serpent came from the mountain. Tian frowned, and his expression changed. Could it be that this giant snake was in the mountain before? Hiss! At this moment, the giant snake flicked its tongue and moved at a very fast speed, pouncing toward Tian and the sky saintess. Your Highness, I'm counting on you. The corner of Tian's mouth twitched, and he said with a faint smile. He hadn't fully recovered yet, so his combat power was limited. He could only rely on the sky saintess. Moreover, the sky saintess's current role was to protect them. Boom! The sky saintess glanced at Tian and then moved directly. She slapped out angrily with her palm, and the shadow of the palm pressed down on the giant snake like a mountain. However, the giant snake rolled in the air, and then a strange scene happened. The giant snake's body instantly changed. Its scales flipped and turned into some kind of spikes, looking like a petrified shield. Bang! In the next moment, the giant snake's body sank, directly smashing the shadow of the palm, and pressed down on the sky saintess. The sky saintess's beautiful eyes trembled, and she instantly dodged to the side. However, she was still a step too late and was hit by the giant snake, sending her flying. Tian frowned. He clearly didn't expect this giant snake to be so strong. Damn it! The saintess of heaven steadied herself. Her pretty face was extremely gloomy. She was obviously angry. The battle prowess of this giant snake was comparable to that of a heavenly tribulation king sage, and the defensive power of its body was probably close to that of a peak heavenly tribulation king sage. Your Highness Saintess, don't underestimate this beast. Tian frowned and warned loudly. Kill! Ignoring Tian, the Holy Daughter of Heaven let out a low growl. Then, like a bolt of lightning, golden light burst forth from her body, making her look like a blazing sun as she charged madly towards the huge snake. This woman is very headstrong. Tian frowned and murmured. If he reminded the Saintess of Heaven, she would probably think that he was looking down on her. Bang! At that moment, the Saintess of Heaven and the giant serpent clashed head-on. A deafening explosion erupted in the void, and the world seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. However, the giant snake's defense was too strong. The scales on the outside of its body seemed to be made of steel. Ah! The Saintess of Heaven cried out in shock. Her body trembled, and she was sent flying again. Yet Tion frowned, but he did not make a move. The Saintess of Heaven stabilized her body in midair. Her eyes were filled with a cold light, as if she wanted to eat someone. This! At that moment, the serpent seemed to have been angered. It let out a strange cry before swinging its tail towards the Sky Saintess. Watch out! Tion's expression changed when he saw this, and he cried out in alarm. The giant snake's attack power was extremely strong. If the Saintess were to be hit, she would be seriously injured even if she did not die. Bang! The Saintess of Heaven reacted very quickly. Wings of light appeared on her back, and she soared into the sky, dodging the fatal attack. However, the mountain behind her was directly broken by the snake's tail and instantly collapsed. This beast is so troublesome. The Saintess of Heaven's expression was gloomy, and dense beads of sweat seeped out of her forehead. She did not expect a mere reptile to be so terrifying. Boom! However, she attacked again in the next moment. The palm of the heavenly path and the royal wrath of the heavens pressed down on the giant snake like a mountain. Seeing this, Tion frowned and roared inwardly, "Stupid woman!" The Saintess of Heaven seemed to be enraged. She actually dared to go head-on against the giant snake. Wasn't she courting death? Bang! As expected, a muffled sound came from the sky. The Saintess of Heaven's figure was sent flying and smashed heavily into the mountain behind her. It seems that I still have to do it myself. Tion frowned and shook his head. Tion, 7 inches below the neck. Fat Cat's voice was heard at that moment. Understood, Tion replied. The corners of his mouth twitched, and his face was filled with cold, murderous intent. Boom! At that moment, the giant snake charged toward the Saintess of Heaven. Now's the time. Tion's eyes trembled when he saw that. He then soared into the sky like a sharp ray of light and attacked. In the next moment, the shadow of a sword fell and penetrated 7 inches below the neck of the giant snake. The giant snake's body swayed in the air for a moment before it stopped and fell. Buzz! As it fell, the scales on the outside of the giant snake's body closed instantly, and a strange sound rang out in the air. The Saintess of Heaven was stunned by the scene before her. Her face was blank, and she could not believe it all. The giant snake almost killed her, but Tion killed it with a single slash. How is that possible? Your Highness, hit the snake where it hurts. Don't tell me you don't understand this principle? Tion smiled faintly. There was a hint of pride in his calmness. The Saintess of Heaven's face was gloomy. She did not say anything and directly descended. At that moment, Maury Shire woke up and looked at the Saintess of Heaven with a faint smile. Your Highness, it's been hard on you. It's not hard at all. She's just working for money. Tion smiled faintly and landed next to Maury Shire. He said, Maury Shire, 1,000 bottles of holy rheumatism. Maury Shire was stunned and confused. The corner of Tion's mouth twitched, and he snapped, Do you think it's free to hire the Holy Daughter as my bodyguard? Maury Shire's expression froze. He then smiled. I didn't expect your Highness to be so expensive. Tion, the Saintess of Heaven frowned. Her expression was extremely cold. Your Highness, do you think you're the only one who's valuable? Do you think it's free for me to protect Maury Shire? Tion did not wait for the Saintess to finish and said with a faint smile. The Saintess of Heaven's face was gloomy and did not say anything. Maury Shire chuckled and did not dawdle at all. He directly gave Tion 1,000 bottles of holy rheumatism. He had more than 4,000 bottles of holy rheumatism on him. Tion had just given them to him, so it was not a big deal for him to take out 1,000 bottles. Of course, he knew that not all of the 1,000 bottles of holy rheumatism belonged to the Saintess. Half of them should belong to Tion. After all, Tion had just saved him. He did not expect that Nyetian would take 90% of it, while the Saintess would only get 10%. The Saintess of Heaven's face scrunched up and did not look as good as before. It turned out that her price was only 1/9 of Nyetian's. Chapter 4001. Boom, boom, boom. In a mountain high up in the sky, rumbling sounds rang out incessantly. The entire mountain seemed to be on the verge of collapsing as it shook violently. Nyetian and the Sky Saintess were dumbfounded. They sensed a terrifying aura being released from the mountain at the same time. "It's a giant snake," Nyetian and the Sky Saintess exclaimed at the same time. The shock in their hearts was perfectly written on their faces. They sensed that the huge roar in the mountain came from the giant snake from before. At this moment, Nyetian finally understood the meaning of the buzzing sound that the giant god had let out before its death. It was clearly summoning its companions. The Holy Daughter of Heaven stared at Nyetian, her eyes filled with astonishment as she exclaimed, "Nyetian." "I know," Nyetian answered. His face was incomparably nervous, and his eyes were trembling slightly. Boom, boom, boom. At that moment, there was a loud explosion in the mountain. Giant snakes rushed out one after another and broke through the huge mountain wall. Their huge bodies were like mountains as they hovered in the air. "It really is this kind of giant snake." Nyetian's expression sank when he saw this. He growled long. At this moment, there were 7 or 8 giant snakes in front of them. The Sky Saintess was already having trouble dealing with one giant snake. Now that she was facing so many giant snakes, she was naturally nervous. "Nyetian." The Sky Saintess looked at Nyetian with a nervous expression. She was clearly panicking. 7 inches below the neck, Nyetian's eyes narrowed. He looked at the Sky Saintess and growled. The Sky Saintess frowned. She immediately realized that Nyetian was referring to the giant god's weak spot. "Kill." In the next moment, the Sky Saintess let out a low roar and moved. Like a stream of light, she charged towards the giant snake. "Impulsive." Nyetian frowned. He did not expect the Sky Saintess to be so brave. He could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Bang, bang, bang. At this moment, the Saintess of Heaven made her move. Rays of golden light shot towards the giant serpent like arrows released from a bow. The sound of flesh being cut rang out in the void. The 3-headed serpent was hit, and its figure suddenly paused in the air. Then it directly stiffened up, falling down. "Good technique." Nyetian was shocked. He didn't expect the Saintess of Heaven to be so violent. The Sky Saintess was much stronger than Nyetian to begin with, so it wasn't surprising that she could display such combat prowess when she knew where the giant serpent's weakness was. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Right at this moment, the other giant snakes let out terrifying sounds. Then, they moved in unison and attacked the Saintess of Heaven. The Sky Saintess sensed the killing intent, and her expression changed slightly. Wings of light appeared on her back, and she instantly retreated, but she was still a step too late. Bang! In the next instant, a muffled sound rang out in the void. The Saintess of Heaven was flung backwards and heavily smashed into the side of the mountain wall. Nyetian frowned. Without hesitation, the wings of astral soul appeared on his back, and he shot towards the sky like a ray of light. Everywhere he passed, blood would be everywhere. Pooh! 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 Immediately, the sound of flesh being cut rang out in the void. The bodies of several giant serpents turned sluggish, and then they fell straight down. Nyetian's lips curled into a cold smile. He walked to the side of the mountain wall and smiled faintly. "Your Highness, are you all right?" "I'm fine." The Saintess stepped out, but it was as if she had suffered some kind of humiliation. She replied coldly. Nyetian didn't feel any pressure when facing these giant serpents, but she was injured several times. This made her feel some kind of humiliation. She was the Saintess of Heaven, but she had repeatedly lost face in front of Nyetian. This made her feel somewhat embarrassed. Nyetian smiled faintly and said, "Your Highness, let's leave this place as soon as possible. It'll be troublesome if more giant serpents appear later." "Yes." The saintess nodded and said, "Your strength hasn't fully recovered yet. It's indeed unwise to continue staying here." Nyation smiled and didn't say anything else. Next, Nyation and the others left the valley, wanting to leave this place as soon as possible. However, as soon as they walked out of the valley, a terrifying rumbling sound rang out in the surroundings, as if the sky was falling and the earth was splitting apart. Shit! Nyation looked at the ground and sensed a familiar aura. His eyes trembled slightly, and his expression changed. "It's those giant serpents." The saintess of heaven's expression turned extremely ugly. It seemed that after killing a few giant serpents, they had angered the serpents. Now, all the giant serpents were madly charging at them. Nyation, the saintess of heaven, was clearly panicking. She looked at Nyation helplessly. "Don't worry about them. Charge straight ahead." Nyation frowned and said in a deep voice. He then led Mori Shire and charged straight ahead. The saintess of heaven responded and followed closely behind Nyation. Boom, boom, boom. At that moment, countless giant serpents broke out of the ground like abyss-breaking dragons and charged at Nyation and the saintess of heaven. Nyation frowned. Sword intent surged all over his body, preventing the giant serpents from approaching while he charged into the sky. However, when the giant serpents were in midair, a pair of wings grew on their backs. They suddenly sped up and charged straight at them. Damn it! Seeing this, Nyation couldn't help but frown. Immediately, the sword of sky appeared in his hand, and he slashed with it. Sword afterimages of 300 billion swords enveloped the serpents like a huge net. Bang, bang, bang. In the next moment, muffled sounds came from the sky. Although the swords couldn't kill the serpents, they prevented them from approaching, giving Nyation and the others a chance of survival. "Get out of here!" Nyation grabbed the opportunity and roared. Then his figure moved wildly and flew thousands of meters away in an instant. Hiss! But at that moment, the serpents were still in hot pursuit. They spread out like a tidal wave. Their terrifying momentum seemed to be able to devour everything. "Nyation, you guys go first. I'll stop them." At that moment, the saintess of heaven's expression sank. She let out a cold roar and stopped moving. Golden light was released from her body like a blooming red lotus. A terrifying momentum filled the air. Nyation frowned, and his expression flickered. But at the next moment, a strange scene happened. The serpents below seemed to have sensed some kind of threat. They stopped moving and began to shrink back, not daring to approach. Chapter 4002. Boom! High up in the sky, a huge aura appeared. It was like the clouds in the sky, covering the sky and covering the earth, as if the sky was about to collapse. This! Nyation jerked his head up and saw a gigantic blackbird with a wingspan that was tens of thousands of meters long. It blotted out heaven and earth and emanated an aura so strong that it seemed to be able to devour this heaven and earth. It turned out that the sea snakes were not afraid of the sky saintess aura, but the giant blackbird's aura. What exactly was this blackbird that could make the sea snakes retreat in defeat? Nyation, what's that? The heaven saintess also felt that something was wrong. She suddenly raised her head, and what she saw caused her expression to darken as she cried out in shock. "Run!" Nyation did not reply too much. His lips twitched, and the seals on his back vibrated as he flew toward a certain direction. Upon seeing this, the holy daughter of heaven didn't hesitate to follow Nyation. Boom! But at that moment, the giant black bird shrouded them like a dark cloud. A powerful force was unleashed, covering the space within a radius of hundreds of thousands of meters. Nyation and the sky saintess were shocked. They felt that the space around them was locked by a terrifying force, making them unable to move at all. The saintess of heaven's pretty face suddenly froze. Her beautiful eyes trembled in shock. They could not move at all. Wouldn't that mean that they were fish on a chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered? Nyation, Mori Shire, suddenly spoke with a dark expression. "Yes." Nyation answered and nodded. Boom! In the next moment, the two of them unleashed their bloodline power at the same time. The space around them trembled as the restrictive force was forcefully torn apart. The Sky Saintess seized the opportunity and dashed thousands of meters away. When she stabilized herself, her eyes were filled with shock. She had seen Yetion and Mori Shire use this power before. It was this power that allowed them to resist the Outyin Chigu. This power seemed to be some kind of resonance power. It was extremely terrifying. However, Yetion and Mori Shire had completely different auras. There was no bloodline connection between them. So how could there be resonance? What secrets are these two hiding? The Sky Saintess' pretty face was cold, and she was puzzled. Yetion and Mori Shire were too mysterious. Even though their bloodlines were completely different, they were still able to produce such a terrifying resonance. The Sky Saintess couldn't understand Yetion at all. Back when the Sky Saintess was defeated by the Devil Race's Devil Sun Xiao Wanjia, Yetion took the initiative to stop Xiao Wanjia. At that time, the Sky Saintess had a whole new level of respect for Yetion. She had no choice but to admit that Yetion's innate talent was indeed above hers. Even Xiao Wanjie was not as talented as Yetion. The Sky Saintess couldn't imagine what kind of environment could create such a powerful cultivator like Yetion. At this moment, she witnessed an even more terrifying side of Yetion. How could she not be surprised? "Your Highness, make your move." At that moment, Yetion suddenly let out a strange cry and slashed the Sky sword in the air. The shadow of the sword was like a wild dragon, charging straight at the giant blackbird. At the same time, Mori Shire also made his move. The Grim Reaper scythe slashed across the void, and a dark aura enveloped the surroundings as if they had fallen into hell. Heavenly Tao, royal heavenly slaughter. At the same time, the Sky Saintess reacted and slammed her palm forward. Instantly, a giant golden palm appeared in the void and instantly merged with the shadow of the sword. Boom! In the next moment, the shadow of the sword descended and bombarded the body of the giant blackbird. The void rumbled as if the sky and earth were about to collapse. Awoo! Immediately after, the huge black bird let out a wail, and its huge body retreated repeatedly before it directly flew away. Seeing this, Yetion's expression changed, and he was unable to react for a long time. He had personally experienced the aura of the giant bird just now. The resonance between him and Mori Shire was not enough to repel the giant bird. The strength of the Sky Saintess was also very limited. Even if she made a move, it was better than nothing. In that case, why were the three of them able to repel the giant bird after joining forces? Just as Yetion was bewildered, Doomsday's voice echoed out, his face filled with shock. The power of Three Hearts resonance is indeed powerful. Even the Dark Knight, Rock, couldn't resist it. Three Hearts resonance? Yetion frowned, a look of astonishment on his face. Just now, it was Mori Shire who reminded him to let the Sky Saintess make a move. He did not expect the Sky Saintess to have a core of heaven and earth in her body. Three Hearts resonance? At this moment, the Sky Saintess came to Yetion and Mori Shire's side and looked at them in shock. She was also confused. Yetion frowned. Did the Sky Saintess not know that she was a heart of heaven and earth warrior? Humph. Mori Shire looked at the Sky Saintess and could not help but laugh. It seems that your Highness does not know that you are a heart of heaven and earth warrior. Heart of heaven and earth? What are you talking about? The Sky Saintess asked with a frown on her face. Since the Heavenly Law Sacred Pavilion does not wish to let your Highness know, then I will not say anything more. Mori Shire did not answer the question. Instead, he smiled faintly. The Sky Saintess frowned and looked at Mori Shire with a gloomy expression. However, since the latter did not want to say anything more, she could not ask him either. Yetion frowned. He was also curious about what kind of core of heaven and earth was inside the Sky Saintess's body. As far as he knew, there should be 9 cores of heaven and earth, and he currently knew of 5. Heaven Punishing Demon Heart, Heaven and Earth Sword Heart, Bodhi Buddhist Heart, All Evil Heart, and Heavenly Law Sacred Heart. If the sky's saintess's core of heaven and earth was included, then there should be 6. Moreover, Nietion knew that the cores of heaven and earth originated from the same source, and they resonated with each other. Just like how he and Mori Shire could resist the Aoyi and Chigu together, and he, Mori Shire, and the sky's saintess could repel the dark night rock together. The resonance between the cores of heaven and earth was very powerful. However, he did not know how to produce the resonance between the cores of heaven and earth, but Mori Shire knew. From this, it seemed that Mori Shire's identity was definitely not ordinary. Perhaps Mori Shire was the same as the Emperor of the Underworld, an expert from the primordial era who relied on a secret technique to survive until now. After all, when Nietion met Mori Shire, the latter was only a remnant spirit. At this moment, Nietion was very curious about the core of heaven and earth in the sky saintess's body. Why did the people of the Heavenly Law Sacred Pavilion not let the sky saintess know about it? At this moment, the sky saintess's expression suddenly changed. Her body trembled, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 4003. Nietion's eyes couldn't help but tremble when he heard Mori Shire's words. The heart of heaven and earth, an origin weapon. The saintess of heaven and earth was indeed a heart of heaven and earth cultivator. Furthermore, the origin weapon in her body had yet to awaken. Nietion had seen quite a few origin weapons like the heart of heaven and earth. His heaven and earth sword heart had the sky sword. Mori Shire's evil heart had the death god scythe. The Bodhi Seed's Bodhi Buddha heart had the Bodhi beads. The flaming Jiufeng's heaven-punishing devil heart had the heaven-punishing gate, and the Devil's Knight's Three Souls profound heart had the Blood Soul path. He didn't know what the saintess of heaven and earth's heart was, nor did he know what her origin weapon was. But at this moment, the aura emitted from the saintess of heaven and earth was extremely terrifying. It was as though there was a surge of energy in her body that was about to explode. At this moment, the saintess of heaven suddenly screamed. Her originally exquisite face actually contorted in pain. Her entire being was actually emitting a malevolent aura. Boom! In the next instant, a terrifying aura was released. Instantly, the void was filled with a desolate and desolate aura. Nietion's expression instantly changed. He actually felt an intense threat. It was as though his entire body was about to wither in this world. This is baleful aura. At the same time, Mori Shire seemed to have sensed something. His expression changed as he let out a cry of fear. It was as though he had seen something extremely terrifying. Baleful aura? Nietion was stunned for a moment before he furrowed his brows. Retreat. At this moment, Mori Shire let out a low roar as he frantically retreated. Nietion immediately reacted. Astral soul wings appeared on his back, and like a ray of light, he retreated a few thousand meters away. Boom! At this moment, the saintess of heaven's body released a myriad of golden rays. It was as if the sun had exploded. The space within hundreds of thousands of meters was filled with dazzling golden rays, making it impossible to open one's eyes. Nietion and Mori Shire's figures were instantly enveloped by the golden light, but what they felt was an extremely terrifying murderous aura, a desolate power that seemed to want to strip away their life energy. What kind of power is this? Why is it so terrifying? Nietion's expression suddenly changed as he spoke in a deep voice. He lowered his head to take a look, and what he saw shocked him to the core. His hands began to crack bit by bit, and then they began to turn black. This process was like his life force was being burned away, and he was withering away. Nietion, this is desolate, baleful chi. We must escape immediately. Mori Shire's eyes trembled as he roared in a low voice. Nietion's expression changed. He spread his wings, and like a giant bird, he brought Mori Shire with him and flew away. After escaping from the range of the golden light, he felt that the murderous aura in the air had weakened significantly, and his hands were gradually recovering. However, he could no longer see the saintess of heaven's figure under the golden light, and he had no idea what her current situation was. This Tian looked at the endless golden light in front of him and frowned. He didn't expect the saintess of heaven's awakening to cause such a huge commotion. I didn't expect the core of heaven and earth in her body to be the desolate, baleful chi. Mori Shire's eyes trembled as he spoke in a deep voice. Desolate, baleful chi. Tian's eyes trembled when he heard this name, and his expression changed. It sounded like this core of heaven and earth was some kind of darkness attribute. The heavenly Tao energy that the saintess of heaven cultivated seemed to be extremely opposed to this desolate, baleful chi. Under such circumstances, would the saintess of heaven really be fine? The desolate, baleful chi is indeed very powerful. Ordinary cultivators can't withstand this kind of life-corroding power. Mori Shire spoke in a deep voice. His eyes flickered with a strange light, as if he was thinking about something. Mori Shire, will Her Highness be fine? Tian frowned and couldn't help but ask, Are you very nervous? Mori Shire laughed. She's not related to you, is she? Besides, won't we be able to obtain the desolate, baleful chi if she dies? Tian's expression sank when he sensed the coldness in Mori Shire's eyes. She's our companion. Are you trying to take advantage of her? Don't be angry. Mori Shire smiled again, and his expression became gentle again. Don't worry, she'll be fine. However, her desolate, baleful chi is definitely not that simple. I'm afraid that this accidental awakening will make someone unhappy. What do you mean? Tian frowned and asked with a cold expression. Don't you find it strange that the saintess of heaven hasn't awakened an origin weapon despite her strength? Mori Shire's lips twitched as he said, She doesn't even know that there is a worldly core in her body. It's obvious that someone is using her. Using her? Tian's eyes trembled and his expression darkened. You're saying that the desolate, baleful chi in Her Highness's body was deliberately planted by someone who didn't want Her Highness to know, right? Yes. Mori Shire nodded and said, I'm guessing that someone forcefully implanted the desolate, baleful chi into the saintess's body when she was young. Then, they used a strange technique to seal its aura and suppress its awakening. However, this time, our three hearts resonance caused the seal on the desolate killing heart to weaken, causing the desolate killing heart to unexpectedly awaken. This, Tian frowned. His face was blank, and he could not react for a long time. The heaven saintess was the saintess of the heavenly sacred pavilion. Her talent in martial arts was so high that it could be said that she was the best in the all-heaven sacred world. Just who was it that implanted the desolate, baleful chi into the saintess' body? What was her goal? It seemed that there was a great conspiracy behind the saintess. Doomsday looked at Tian, a strange light flickering in his eyes as he said with a faint smile, Everyone has their own destiny. Tian, let the holy daughter handle her own affairs. You better take care of your own business. Tian's eyes dimmed slightly, but he did not speak. Indeed, he had a lot of troubles on his hands right now. He did not have the ability to take care of others. In fact, he had no intention of interfering with the saintess matters. He was merely curious. At that moment, Tian suddenly sensed a change in the aura in the sky. He could not help but frown and exclaim. Many golden rays of light surged in the sky like waves. However, if one were to look carefully, one would discover that these golden rays of light were rapidly dimming. Chapter 4004. High up in the sky, the black light surged into the sky. Tian and Mori Shire sensed the desolate, ominous aura and retreated once again. However, at that moment, the desolate, ominous aura began to slowly converge toward the center. What's going on? Tian frowned, and his expression changed. Mori Shire's expression was gloomy. He was also confused. At the same time, a beautiful figure stood at the center of the endless black light. It was the sky's saintess. At this moment, the sky's saintess' eyes were a strange, pure black color, and her entire body was surging with black runes. It was an extremely strange sight. The endless, desolate, ominous aura was converging towards the sky saintess. To be more precise, it was converging toward her left arm. In the blink of an eye, the endless, desolate, ominous aura completely disappeared and converged on the sky's Saintess left arm. This, Nietion and Maury Shire were shocked by the scene before them. They saw the sky's Saintess standing high up in the sky from afar. Her body did not seem to have changed at all, as if nothing had happened. Nietion frowned in astonishment. Nietion, look closely at her left arm, Maury Shire said with a dark expression. Nietion's eyes flickered. He used his divine sense to examine it, and his face froze. There was an enormous, desolate aura in the sky, Saintess' left arm. It seems that all the desolate, ominous aura has gathered in her left arm. Nietion frowned and murmured. Yes, Maury Shire nodded and said, the desolate, ominous heart's origin weapon has awakened. Awakened? Nietion was stunned and could not react for a moment. Yes, Maury Shire nodded and said, the hand of desolation. The hand of desolation? Nietion's eyes trembled. He stared at the sky's Saintess' left arm and immediately reacted. The origin weapon that the sky Saintess had awakened was in her left hand. To be more precise, the origin weapon of the desolate evil heart was the hand of desolation, the left hand of the Saintess of Heaven. Nietion and Maury Shire moved and arrived beside the Saintess of Heaven. Their eyes were slightly trembling, and they seemed very surprised. What happened just now? The Heaven Saintess looked at Nietion and Li Wuyo in astonishment. Clearly, she still had no idea what had happened. Without waiting for Nietion to speak, Maury Shire took a step forward and said with a faint smile, nothing. It was obvious that he didn't want to tell the Sky Saintess about the desolate evil heart. The Heaven Saintess furrowed her brows and hesitated, but she did not say anything. Your Highness Saintess, let's leave this place first. Nietion frowned and said. The Heaven Saintess replied, and then the three of them flew towards another valley. After a while, Nietion and the two of them arrived at a remote valley. They didn't know anything about the Shadow Moon Forest, so they only needed to survive for half a month. Most importantly, Nietion and Maury Shire were still injured, and the Heaven Saintess had just awakened her origin weapon, so she was obviously not used to it yet. For the next few days, Nietion and the two of them recuperated in the valley. After 3 days, Nietion stood up. His aura had increased a lot, and he looked much sharper. Maury Shire's injuries were almost healed, and his aura was even stronger than Nietion's. At this moment, the Heaven Saintess suddenly came to Maury Shire's side and asked with a gloomy face, Maury Shire, what happened to my body? Your Highness Saintess, you don't even know what happened to your body. How would I know? Maury Shire raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. Tell me what happened. The Heaven Saintess's face suddenly darkened. Then she stretched out her left hand and lifted her sleeve. What was revealed was not a snow-white arm, but an arm that was as black as iron. Moreover, there were dark runes surging on the arm. It looked extremely strange. Nietion's face changed when he saw this scene. He was shocked and speechless. He didn't expect that the Heaven Saintess's body would undergo such a terrifying change. The Heaven Saintess's arm seemed to have been deeply poisoned. The dark aura made one's heart tremble. Amazing. In such a short time, the desolate hands have actually grown to such an extent. Maury Shire looked at the Heaven Saintess's arm and smiled faintly. He was actually curious. Maury Shire, what exactly happened? The Heaven Saintess's face darkened as she asked Maury Shire coldly. Your Highness Saintess, if you are curious about this, you should ask the people of the Heaven Dao Sacred Pavilion. I'm just an outsider, and there are some things that I really can't say, Maury Shire said calmly. The Heaven Saintess's face darkened. Just as she was about to say something, the dark runes on her desolate hands suddenly surged, as if they had sensed something. At the same time, the expressions of Nietion and Maury Shire also changed. They suddenly raised their heads and looked up into the sky. As far as their eyes could see, there were two figures standing there coldly. One of the figures was very familiar to Nietion and the rest. It was Ao Ian Chigu. Beside him stood a young black-clothed martial artist. His aura was no weaker than his own. Nietion, I've finally found you. Aoyi and Chigu's eyes were cold and locked onto Nietion with a murderous look. Did you bring a helper this time? Nietion's lips twitched. There was no fear on his face. Instead, he looked very playful. You're dead meat this time. Aoyi and Chigu smiled cold. Then, he turned his gaze and locked onto the Heaven Saintess. He said, Stupid girl, the person who ambushed me was you, right? So what if I was? The Heaven Saintess replied coldly. The desolate hands secretly clenched its fists. She felt that there was an explosive power in the hand of desolation, like a wild beast trying to break free from its shackles. Chigu, this woman is not simple. The expressions of the people beside Pardon Heaven's Chigu changed slightly as they said grimly, So what if she's not simple? Aoyi Chigu smiled cold and said, Can't we kill a few ants if we join forces? That's true. The person laughed and said, It's been a long time since a genius from the Shaman Luo clan and a genius from the Pardon Sky clan teamed up. These ants should be able to rest in peace after dying in our hands. The Shaman Luo clan. The martial artist in black was not from the Pardon Sky clan, but from the Shaman Luo clan. Like the Pardon Sky clan, the Shaman Luo clan was one of the 4 ancient holy clans. The martial artist in black was called Wu Luofeng. He was a genius among the younger generation of the Shaman Luo clan. Chapter 4005. Aoyi Chigu and Wu Luofeng had teamed up. Their aura was imposing and they were determined to win. Nietion and Morishire looked at each other and nodded. The abilities of the 3 of them were not considered strong, especially when compared to Aoyi Chigu and Wu Luofeng. They were a whole realm apart. Under such circumstances, in order to fight against the 2 of them, they had to rely on the resonance of the core of heaven and earth. Chigu, don't tell me that the people who defeated you are these 2 ants. At that moment, Wu Luofeng laughed. With a superior attitude, he stared at Nietion and Morishire with disdain. How could I lose to them? Aoyi Chigu's expression darkened. He looked at Heaven's Saintess cold and said, If it weren't for this be asterisk T-Sich, they would have died by my hands. Is that so? Wu Luofeng laughed coldly. He raised his eyebrows and looked at the pardoning Heaven 7 Bones. He said, You, the great genius of the Pardoning Heaven clan, were actually injured by 3 foreign ancient martial art practitioners. If this isn't defeat, what is? Aoyi Chigu's expression instantly darkened, and his eyes looked as though they were about to spit fire. Indeed, in his heart, not being able to kill Nietion and the others was a defeat. However, he had to admit that the abilities of Nietion and the others had far exceeded his expectations, especially when Nietion and Morishire teamed up. It was something that he had never expected. Wu Luofeng, how are their abilities? You can test them out. Aoyi Chigu's lips twitched, and he laughed coldly. It was obvious that although the 2 of them had teamed up, they were competing against each other. They even looked down on each other. Sure. Wu Luofeng laughed and said, However, you have to help me look after that woman. I don't want to end up like you and be ambushed. No problem. Aoyi Chigu sneered. His eyes were as sharp as blades as he glared at the Saintess of Heaven and said, If she dares to make a move, I will destroy her. That's good. Wu Luofeng shouted once again, after which he took a step forward. In an instant, his entire body's aura was released. It was as if dark clouds were rolling. His monstrous aura caused the surrounding space to tremble. Morishire, are you ready? Nietion sensed the surging aura coming from the void, but he was not afraid at all. Instead, his lips curled into a playful smile. Morishire nodded. Of course, he understood what Nietion meant. Wu Luofeng fighting alone was an opportunity for them. Taking advantage of the fact that Wu Luofeng did not understand them, they had to show Wu Luofeng their strength. Even if they did not kill him, they had to injure him severely. 2 ants. I, Wu Luofeng, would like to see what you are capable of. Wu Luofeng sneered. The aura of his entire body increased crazily. The monstrous dark aura was as if hell had descended. The oppressive aura seemed to want to swallow everything. Yet Tion smiled coldly. Bring it on, then. His eyes flickered slightly, as if he was pondering something. You are courting death, being looked down upon by a foreign tribe. Wu Luophone was enraged. The dark aura of his entire body became violent, and it rolled in the void like a storm. Nietion and Mori Shire's faces changed at the same time. Wu Luofeng's aura was not any weaker than Out Yin Chigu's. Wu Luofeng looked much older than Out Yin Chigu. Hence, it was normal for him to be stronger than the latter. Wu Luofeng, world devourer. At that moment, Wu Luofeng let out a roar. His entire body was like a wild beast as he dashed forward. At that moment, the billowing dark energy behind him pressed forward. It was like a dark mountain as a monstrous killing aura filled the entire sky. Boom! Swoosh! When Nietion and Mori Shire saw the situation, they attacked with the Sky Sword and the Grim Reaper Scythe at the same time. Instantly, a dark sword shadow appeared in the void. Under the support of the frightening evil power, a terrifying aura exploded. Boom! In the next moment, the sword shadow rushed into the sky like a dragon. The aura shook the sky, and it was extremely powerful. Wu Luofeng creased his eyebrows. He suddenly felt threatened, and his facial expression changed involuntarily. Yet Tion and Mori Shire could escape from Out Yin Chigu's hands. This let him know that the two of them were not ordinary people. However, he obviously did not expect Nietion and Mori Shire to be so terrifying. He was a heavenly tribulation sage, king expert, and a member of the ancient sacred clan. Yet, he actually felt threatened by two foreign sage martial artists. This was too unbelievable. Rumble. At this moment, two frightening powers collided. Heaven and earth shook, and the entire sky looked as though it was going to collapse. Nietion and Mori Shire's figures retreated at the same time. They flew backwards and smashed into the mountain walls on both sides. Swoosh! At the same time, Wu Luofeng felt a sharp aura coming towards him. His face changed, and he instantly moved a few meters to the side. However, he was still a little too late. A blade flew past his chest and left a wound on his body that went deep into his bones. Blood immediately gushed out. Damn it! Wu Luofeng roared, and he looked as though he was about to go berserk. He never expected that he would be injured by an ant from another tribe. This guy is really strong. Nietion and Mori Shire steadied themselves. They looked at each other and were shocked. In the previous stroke, the two of them activated the power of resonance. It was much scarier than when they fought against Out Yin Chigu. However, it was a pity that it didn't cause any serious damage to Wu Luofeng. Wu Luofeng's power had exceeded their expectations. Wu Luofeng. Now you know that they aren't as simple as they seem. Out Yin Chigu saw that Wu Luofeng was injured and his eyes trembled. He was happy to see Wu Luofeng being injured. Shut up. Wu Luofeng looked at Out Yin Chigu cold and roared. He shouted, If I don't kill these two ants today, my name isn't Wu Luofeng. Humph humph. Out Yin Chigu laughed coldly, and his face was full of pride. However, the next moment, he suddenly realized something, and his face changed. He stared at the Sky Saintess. In midair, the Sky Saintess's body was filled with a barren aura. An extremely dark aura flowed in the void, and it was extremely frightening. Out Yin Chigu felt the aura from the Sky Saintess, and his face changed as he shouted in shock. At that moment, he actually felt an extremely strong, murderous aura. This feeling made him feel extremely uneasy. Nietion frowned, and his face changed. Not good. Mori Shire looked at the Sky Saintess, and his eyes froze. He said in a deep voice, she was affected by the resonance of the two hearts and lost control of the desolate hands. Chapter 4006. Boom! In the air, the dark shadow of the fist pressed down on Out Yin Chigu like an ancient beast. Suddenly, the heavens and earth rumbled and trembled. You're courting death. Out Yin Chigu frowned and growled. He threw a punch, and the bloody shadow of the fist pounced forward. Bang! In the next instant, the two fists collided, and the heavens and earth shook. Suddenly, a terrifying wave of energy spread out. Everywhere it passed, time and space seemed to distort and tremble. Nietion and Mori Shire's expressions changed, and they retreated a few thousand meters. The Sky Saintess's punch was so powerful that it was shocking. Wu Luophone was also shocked, and he was also forced to retreat. A pair of bloody wings appeared on Aoyin Chigu's back, and he managed to stabilize himself. On the other hand, the Sky Saintess's body was like a mountain, and she did not move at all. What a terrifying power! Nietion's eyes trembled, and he exclaimed at his heart. It was unbelievable that the Sky Saintess had the upper hand against Aoyin Chigu with just one punch. A few days ago, the Sky Saintess could only resort to sneak attacks against the 7 bones of pardoning heaven. The desolate evil heart had awakened the origin weapon and greatly improved the Sky Saintess' strength. The Sky Saintess might be able to defeat a powerhouse like Xiao Wanjia of the Demon Clan now. What kind of power is this? Aoyin Chigu exclaimed. The shock in his heart was written perfectly on his face. However, the Sky Saintess did not speak. Her eyes were as dark as the abyss, and the desolate evil chi around her continued to increase as if it was going to break through its limit. This is not a good situation. Mori Shire looked at the Sky Saintess and frowned. His face was gloomy. The Sky Saintess's hand of desolation was out of control, and the desolate evil chi was released continuously. This was a burden to her martial body. In the end, if the desolate, baleful chi was released too much, the hand of desolation would be crippled, and the Saintess of Heaven would lose her life. Aoyin Chigu, let's join forces, said Wu Luophone cold as he looked at Aoyin Chigu. Aoyin Chigu nodded. At this moment, they could only join forces. Once they joined forces, they would not allow Nietion and the others to live. Wu Luo's dark world opened. The corners of Wu Luofeng's mouth curled into a cold smile. After that, he let out a low roar. Suddenly, the enormous Wu Luo dark power around his body was released. It was like a never-ending sea wave that instantly spread to the surrounding space of hundreds of thousands of meters. A huge barrier was activated right away. Award! Nietion could not help but frown as he sensed the oppressive power in the air. He exclaimed inwardly, "This is the bloodline barrier." At the same time, Mori Shire said in a deep voice, his face extremely gloomy, "Ents, it is your honor to die in Wu Luo's dark world." In the dark air, Wu Luofeng's deep voice was heard. Suddenly, there was a huge aura in the air that made Nietion and the others tremble. Puff! Mori Shire's body trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. "Mori Shire, are you okay?" Nietion's eyes were focused as he asked in a deep voice. Mori Shire did not speak, but shook his head. Regardless of whether it was dual hearts resonance or 3 hearts resonance, the dominant one was Mori Shire. However, Mori Shire's martial body was far weaker than Nietion's. Hence, he was seriously injured after the previous exchange. Now that he was being pressured by Wu Luo's dark world, he could not hold on any longer. "Wu Luo, don't talk nonsense with them. Kill them directly." Then, Aoyin Chigu's deep voice was heard. "All right," Wu Luophone bellowed. Suddenly, a huge, dark hand appeared in the air and crashed down, destroying everything in its path. "Nietion, it is all up to you." Mori Shire frowned. Then, he threw the death scythe to Nietion. Nietion frowned. The moment he took the death scythe, he felt a surge of evil power. "Fight!" The next moment, his eyes darkened and he bellowed. Immediately, the godly demon body was activated. The godly demon inverse mark covered his entire body, and the power of the godly demon filled the sky. "Kill!" Then he moved both his hands. The sky sword and the death scythe attacked at the same time. Heaven and earth became one, and yin and yang became one. Bang! In an instant, the dark shadow of the sword soared into the sky and fought against the huge, dark hand. There was a loud bang, and the 2 powers collapsed at the same time. Yet Tion's body trembled, and he retreated a few thousand meters before he managed to stabilize himself. Puff! Just as his body stabilized, he felt his chi and blood rushing to his head. He spat out a mouthful of blood. In Wu Luo's dark world, He was already under great pressure. Now that he was using the sky sword and the death scythe at the same time, the pressure on his martial body was immense. Even someone as strong as him could not bear it. This guy is really strong. Mori Shire witnessed the scene and was shocked. He did not expect Nyetian to be able to explode with such terrifying power when he was under the pressure of the sky sword and the death scythe at the same time. What was even more terrifying was that Nyetian's injuries were minor and not fatal at all. Nyetian's martial body was unimaginably terrifying. "You little ant, you do have some skills." Wu Luo Feng laughed coldly and said arrogantly, "But today, you are destined to die here. Is that so?" Nya Tianling smiled, and his bloodthirsty lips curled up. He had an evil look on his face. He had activated the godly demon body, and his martial body was almost pushed to the limit. However, as long as he was still breathing, he would fight to the death. On the other side, Aoyin Shigu and the Sky Saintess were fighting to the death. It was hard to tell who would win. The Sky Saintess was not weaker than Aoyin Shigu under the pressure of the blood-sift dark world. Furthermore, her aura was still increasing. The Sky Saintess was at the 9th level of heavenly justice, while Aoyin Shigu was at the 1st level of heavenly punishment. Although it was only one level, the difference was like heaven and earth. However, the Sky Saintess had lost control of the Hand of Desolation. The desolate evil chi was extremely violent and suppressed the power of Aoyin Shigu's bloodline. However, the Sky Saintess was destined to not be able to maintain this state for long. If she could not control it, her life would be in danger. At that moment, Mori Shire looked at Nyetian and shouted, "Nyetian, the Sky Saintess is in danger. We must rush out of the barrier." He felt that Nyetian's limit was not limited to this. Nyetian frowned and nodded. Then, the astral soul wings on his back flapped, and he dashed toward the Sky Saintess like a ray of light. What is this guy trying to do? Doomsday couldn't help but frown, his expression turning sluggish. The Sky Saintess had lost control, but Nyetian still dashed over. Was he crazy? Doomsday 12 suddenly thought of something, and his expression changed. He couldn't help but shout, "This madman!" He suddenly realized that Nyetian wanted to use the Sky Saintess' desolate evil chi to trigger the Three-Hearted Resonance. The Three-Hearted Resonance was the only way to break through the Wu Luo dark world. Chapter 4007. Mori Shire understood Nyetian's plan, and his face froze. He had never expected that Nyetian would be so crazy as to single-handedly contend against the pressure of Three-Hearted Disciples' resonance. One should know that back then, when Mori Shire and the other two activated the Three-Hearted Resonance together, it was extremely difficult. Mori Shire and the Sky Saintess were even injured because of it. Yet Nyetian wanted to fight against the Three-Hearted Resonance alone. How could Mori Shire not be surprised? Mori Shire thought to himself that if he were to fight against the Three-Hearted Resonance alone, there would only be one ending for him: death. If it was against the Three-Hearted Resonance, he would probably explode and die before he could even activate it. He knew that Nyetian's martial body was far stronger than his. However, was Nyetian's martial body really that strong? At that moment, in the dark, empty space, Nyetian's body was like lightning. He flew towards the Sky Saintess and arrived before her in an instant. Dying, the Holy Daughter of Heaven had lost control of her Hand of Desolation. Her mind was blurry, and she couldn't tell the difference between friend and foe. She shot a glance at Nyetian and let out a bellow as she slapped her Hand of Desolation down. In the next moment, an incomparably violent aura of desolation surged towards Nyetian like a volcano eruption. Good timing. Nyetian's eyes dimmed, and his lips curled into a cold smile. Then, the scythe of the god of death in his hand slashed across the air. A terrifying whirlpool appeared and actually absorbed the chi of desolation in the air. Ugh! At that moment, Nyetian's body trembled slightly, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The incomparably violent chi of desolation was too much for him to handle. "Ant, you are asking for death." When Wu Luo Feng saw this scene, He instantly let out a furious roar, after which the boundless space shook, following which the boundless Wu Luo's dark power started to surge. Like a huge beast, it pressed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian sensed the monstrous aura rushing towards him, but his eyes turned cold. There was not the slightest hint of fear in his eyes. Instead, he was filled with a strong desire to fight. Boom! In the next moment, the wings on his back shook violently. At the same time, the sword in the sky slashed out angrily. Instantly, the swordswell was like a tidal wave that rampaged between heaven and earth. Buzz! In the void, a deep sword sound rang out. Heaven and earth shook, and the entire Wu Luo bounded domain seemed to be collapsing. Such a strong aura. Wu Luo Feng suddenly felt something. His expression changed, and he let out a low roar. Boom! Bang, bang, bang. Immediately after, the sword shadow soared into the sky and bombarded Wu Luo's dark power. Waves of Wu Luo's dark power could not withstand the power of the sword shadow, and exploded into pieces. In the next moment, the entire Wu Luo dark world, under the attack of the sword shadow, shook violently and was on the verge of collapse. "Aunt, you want to break my dark world? Impossible." When Wu Luo Feng saw this, he let out a roar. Instantly, the blood in his body surged, and an even more violent Wu Luo's dark power appeared. It forcefully stabilized the huge dark world. Bang! Immediately, under the pressure of the dark world, the sword shadow could no longer withstand it and instantly collapsed. At the same time, Nie Tian's body trembled, and he suddenly took a few steps back. He swayed continuously, and it was obvious that he could no longer stand. His entire body was dripping with blood, and his face was as pale as a piece of paper. Even his body seemed much smaller. Three-hearted resonance, godly demon body, in addition to his serious injuries and the pressure from Wu Luo Dark World, made it difficult for his martial body to withstand it. At that moment, he was really an arrow at the end of its flight. Even though his martial body was strong, there was a limit. At the end of the day, his abilities were still too weak. "Aunt, you have shocked me, Wu Luo Feng." Wu Luofeng's eyes trembled coldly, and his eyes were filled with cold, murderous intent. He had never expected Nie Tian to be so strong that he had almost broken his Wu Luo Dark World. One should know that his Wu Luo Dark World was a bloodline barrier, and it was extremely strong. Even a peak heaven calamity king sage might not be able to break it. As for Nie Tian, he was only of level 1 heavenly e-cultivation, and he had almost broken Wu Luo Dark World. This was too terrifying. If Wu Luo Feng had not ignited his vital qi at the crucial moment, Wu Luo Dark World would have been broken by Nie Tian. Wu Luo Feng could not imagine how a martial art practitioner from another clan could have such powerful abilities. He had to admit that Nie Tian was the scariest genius he had ever seen. In the 4 ancient holy clans, there was definitely no one who could match Nie Tian's talent in martial arts. Wu Luo Feng would definitely not allow such a terrifying person to live. "Wu Luo Feng, is it?" Nie Tianling smiled and said in a low voice, "You have disappointed me. The geniuses of the 4 ancient holy clans are just SOSO. Insolent." Wu Luo Feng smiled coldly. Then, the murderous intent in his eyes intensified. His body moved instantly, and he slammed his palm towards Nie Tian. Rumble. At that moment, the dark world of Wu Luo suddenly trembled, and then it collapsed directly. Puff! Wu Luofeng's body suddenly stopped moving, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as white as a sheet. When Nie Tian saw this, he was stunned. "My barrier is broken. How is this possible?" Wu Luo Feng steadied his body, and his eyes trembled. His face was full of shock, and he could not accept it. "Nie Tian, are you okay?" Just then, a familiar voice was heard. Then, a figure appeared in the sky. Tang 13. Nie Tian raised his head and saw the face of the figure clearly. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. The person who had appeared was none other than Tang 13. "Luckily, I'm not too late." Tang 13 smiled and wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. It seemed that breaking the blood net enchantment had taken a toll on him. Tian furrowed his eyebrows, puzzled. Just now, the Three Hearts resonance had not been able to break Wu Luo's dark world. How did Tang 13 do it? Could it be that Wu Luo's dark world was easier to break from the outside? Maybe Tang 13 had some special techniques. Young man, who are you? Wu Luofeng raised his head and stared at Tang 13. He was filled with murderous intent. I am Ye Tian's friend. Tang 13 smiled faintly. Then, his body moved, and he came to Ye Tian's side. That's great. You shall die with him. Wu Luofeng smiled coldly and took a step forward. Instantly, an infinite amount of Wu Luo's dark force rolled, and the entire sky turned dark. Ye Tian, step back. Leave this guy to me. Tang 13's eyes dimmed, and she opened her ghost eye. Her entire body's qi increased tremendously. Ye Tian nodded his head and retreated to the side. Ye Tian, Her Highness, the saint, is about to die. Just then, Mori Shire came to the other side and said, Chapter 4008. Oh no! Witnessing this, Ye Tian's expression changed and his heart dropped. The Heavens Maiden's chi had weakened. If she were to face Outyin Chigu's full-force attack head-on, she would definitely die. But now, Ye Tian and Mori Shire were both heavily injured and could not do anything. Tang 13, on the other hand, was entangled by Wu Luofeng and had no time to care. It seemed that there was only one path before the Heavens Maiden death. The next second, waves of blood filled the sky. Just as life and death hung in the balance, something happened. In the air, a ray of white light appeared. Extremely fast, it whizzed by and saved the Heavens Maiden. Tang Yuyu. Ye Tian's eyes wavered, and he shouted in joy. Ye Tian. High up in the sky, Tang Yuyu steadied himself. Not far away stood the Heavens Maiden. Right now, the Heavens Maiden's eyes were still dark. She looked like a man-eating beast. Sadly, she no longer had the ability to do so. Another ant, Pardon Heaven's Seven Bones, face darkened coldly, and he gave a low growl. All of you outsider ants deserve to die. Is that so? Before he even finished his sentence, a deep voice rang in the air. Then, a sturdy silhouette appeared, standing there like a mountain. Jun Jinxing. Nye Tian's eyes widened, and he shouted out the person's name. Nye Tian. Jun Jinxing grinned. Then, he stepped forward, and the Heaven's Punishment Blade appeared in his hand. His entire body was ferocious and unstoppable. Nye Tian let out a long breath of foul air, feeling much more at ease. After the intense battle, Outyin Chigu and Wu Luofeng had exhausted much of their energy and were both injured. Even if Tang 13 and Jun Jinxing were no match for them, they would be able to hold on for some time. Ants will always be ants. It doesn't matter how many of you come. Parting Heaven's Seven Bones laughed maniacally. Instantly, the blood net energy around his body surged violently. Boundless waves of blood churned as if they wanted to devour everything. Humph, Tang 13 coldly snickered. Then let me see what kind of people you think you are. Courting death. Outyin Chigu roared out and struck out in a frenzy. A wave of blood appeared in the sky and slammed towards Tang 13. Instantly, the entire heaven and earth shook. Tang 13 was cold and fearless. Her ghost eye shone, and a wave of power was unleashed. It was as if it had the power to pierce through everything. It shattered the wave of blood and headed straight for Outyin Chigu. In an instant, Outyin Chigu felt a bone-piercing chill. His expression changed, and he retreated immediately. Pooh! In the next moment, a black light whizzed out in front of him, leaving a deep, bloody mark on his face. Damn it! Heaven forgiving Seven Bones howled. He didn't think that the unassuming-looking Tang 13 would have such terrifying capabilities. He had just fought against the Saintess of Sky and was suppressed by her. He was heavily injured. Now that he was facing Tang 13, he found it hard to defend himself. The worst is yet to come. Tang 13 coldly laughed, after which her silhouette flickered like lightning as she dashed forward. In the air, a shadow of a gigantic wolf appeared, attacking the seven skeletons. The heaven-pardoning seven bones expression involuntarily changed and actually sensed the aura of impending death. He retreated in a frenzy. At the same time, he unleashed his blood energy to defend against the giant wolf. However, the impact of the giant wolf was far too strong. He was forced back thousands of meters. After he stabilized himself, he puked out a mouthful of blood. What kind of power is this? Aoyan Chigu's eyes widened in shock. He had a feeling that the aura Tang 13 had unleashed was very similar to Nietian's. Killer wolf. Tang 13's expression was cold and murderous. Pardon Heaven, Seven Bones frowned, a look of shock actually appearing on his face. On the other side, Wu Luofeng and Jun Jinxing were locked in an intense battle. Under normal circumstances, Jun Jinxing was no match for Wu Luofeng. However, Wu Luofeng was first injured, and then his dark world of Wu was broken. He was severely injured. Therefore, it was difficult for him to fight against Jun Jinxing. Nietian, the saintess's breathing is getting weaker. She can't hold on much longer. Just then, Tang Yu brought the saintess of sky to Nietian and Mori Shire. Nietian's expression darkened. He used his consciousness to scan the saintess of sky. The saintess of sky was in a coma. Her breathing was weak, and it was getting weaker. It was as if she would disappear at any moment. What's wrong with her? Nietian frowned and asked Mori Shire. Apocalypse 12 shook his head and solemnly said, "Just now, she lost control of her desolate hands. The desolate, baleful chi kept being released and devoured her blood energy. I'm afraid she won't be able to hold on much longer." "How can I save her?" Nietian asked in a low voice. He wasn't familiar with the saintess of sky. However, he was the reason why she was like this. After all, it was because of him and Mori Shire that the saintess awakened the desolate hands. She lost control of her desolate hands because their hearts resonated. If the saintess of sky were to die now, he would feel guilty. "I can save her, but I need a reason." Mori Shire laughed and looked strangely at Nietian. "What do you mean?" Nietian frowned and asked. "I'll save her. You owe me a favor." Mori Shire's lips twitched. "After the recruitment of the 5 academies ends, I need you to accompany me to a place." "Sure." Nietian nodded without the slightest hesitation. Apocalypse 12 nodded slightly, then stretched out his hand to support the sky saintess. Strange runes surged out of his palm and instantly enveloped the sky saintess. Nietian frowned. He was worried that Mori Shire would play some tricks. However, the saintess of sky's aura stabilized after a while. Following that, the runes flowed into the saintess' body. Her pale face slowly regained its color. Once she wakes up, she should be fine. Apocalypse 12 took a deep breath, beads of sweat appearing on his forehead as he forced a smile. "Okay." Nietian sensed the saintess of sky's aura. He was relieved when he didn't find anything strange. At that moment, Tang 13 and the other 3 were still fighting fiercely in the sky. "These 2 are really troublesome," Nietian said with a frown as he looked at Aoyan Chigu and Wu Luofeng. However, at that moment, Doomsday 12's expression flickered, and he exclaimed, "Nietian." Chapter 4009. When Nietian saw that it was the 9th elder of the Pardon Sky clan, Xie Tianjin and Shi Tianluan, he was shocked and his heart sank. Xie Tianjin and Xie Tianluan were the hosts of the Yin Moon Forest test. He didn't know what attitude they had when they arrived. If Xie Tianjin and Shi Tianluan were up to no good and wanted to kill Nietian and the others, it would be troublesome. 9th elder, Xie Tian Chigu, stood coldly in the sky. When he saw Xie Tianjin and the others appear, his eyes trembled with joy and he shouted, "Aoyan Chigu, stop!" Xie Tianjin's face was gloomy as he shouted, and then he took a step forward, causing the space in the surroundings to tremble. Aoyan Chigu's expression changed, and he stopped. Is the 9th elder going to fight personally? Xie Tianjin was the 9th elder of the Pardon Sky clan. He had a high status and was powerful. If he attacked Nietian and the others, it would be too much. The 7 bones of pardoning heaven stopped. However, on the other side, Wu Luofeng did not stop. His entire body's aura surged crazily. It was incomparably violent as it pressed towards Jun Jianxing. How dare you? Seeing this, Xie Tianjun's face darkened as he growled. Then, he waved his hand and a tremendous force descended, locking Wu Luofeng in place. Elder of the Pardon Sky clan, what do you mean? Wu Luofeng was suppressed by the great power, and his face turned cold. He looked at Xie Tianjun and roared furiously. I asked you to stop. Didn't you hear me? Xie Tianjun was cold, and his voice was like thunder. He was obviously angry. Wu Luofeng's expression changed, and he said, You asked me to kill them, and now you ask me to stop. What is this? Wu Luofeng, you can leave now. Xie Tianjun's eyes darkened, and he said in a cold tone, Elder of the Pardon Sky clan, if you don't give me an explanation today, I will not stop. Wu Luofeng looked at Xie Tianjun and said domineeringly, Not giving up? Xie Tianjun frowned and spoke coldly. His eyes were cold as he asked, Then what do you want? Indeed, the reason why Wu Luofeng had appeared there was because of Aoyan Chigu's invitation. The fact that Xie Tianjun and Shi Tianluan didn't stop him meant that they had tacitly agreed. But now Xie Tianjun changed his mind. Wu Luofeng gave a low roar and turned around abruptly. He pointed at Nie Tian from afar and said word by word, You must die. Nie Tian could not help but be stunned. He did not expect Wu Luofeng to hate him so much. Wu Luofeng, the person you are pointing at is the great priest of our Pardon Sky clan. In our Pardon Sky clan, the position of the great priest is the same as that of the clan leader and the great elder. At that moment, Pardon Tianjun took a step forward and said loudly, The Pardon Heaven clan can pretend that nothing happened earlier. You can leave now. Great priest of Pardon Sky. Wu Luofeng was stunned when he heard Pardon Tianjun's words. He looked at Aoyan Chigu abruptly. The latter had never told him that Nie Tian was the great priest of the Pardon Sky clan. Aoyan Chigu's expression was equally ugly. In fact, it was even uglier than Wu Luofeng's. No matter how stupid he was, he could tell that Pardon Tianjun had changed his mind and wanted to protect Nie Tian. Ninth Elder, why? Aoyan Chigu lifted his head abruptly and asked Pardon Tianjun. He is the great priest. Pardon Tianjun's eyes darkened, and he said loudly, Isn't this reason enough? Great priest. Aoyan Chigu's eyes dilated and quivered. He did not expect Pardon Tianjun to acknowledge Nie Tian's identity as the great priest. Looking at Pardon Tianjun, Nie Tian felt as if a heavy stone had been lifted from his heart. It seemed like his performance had successfully changed Pardon Tianjun's mind. Nie Tian's guess was right. It was a shocking performance that had changed Pardon Tianjun's mind. In fact, Pardon Tianjun had been observing Nie Tian secretly when he first stepped into the Shadow Moon Forest. Pardon Tianjun had witnessed the earth-shattering battle earlier. There were even a few times during the battle when Pardon Tianjun could not help but want to make a move. However, Nie Tian had broken through his limits time and time again and withstood the attacks with his own strength. Not long ago, Pardon Tianjun had informed clan leader Pardon Tian Ichi and great elder Zhoutian Wanchuan about the situation. After a discussion, the two of them had decided to acknowledge Nie Tian's identity. Without Pardon Tian Ichi and Zhoutian Wanchuan's approval, Pardon Tianjun would not have stood out to support Nie Tian. Aoyan Chigu, I know that there has been some misunderstanding between you and the great priest. At this moment, Pardon Tianjun's eyes flickered and he said loudly, Fortunately, it did not lead to a disaster. In my opinion, you should apologize to the high priest right now and beg for his forgiveness. Aoyan Chigu's eyes trembled and his face froze as though he was doubting his hearing. He did not expect that Pardon Tianjun would actually ask him to apologize to Nie Tian. He was a genius of the Pardon Sky clan, while Nie Tian was just an outsider. A few days ago, Nie Tian was still an ant in his eyes. It was impossible for him to apologize. Aoyan Chigu, did you not hear what I said? Pardon Tianjun's face sank, and he said cold when he saw that Aoyan Chigu did not speak and clearly did not want to apologize. He did not want to force Aoyan Chigu, but if the latter did not know what was good for him, He did not mind using some forceful methods either. It was true that Aoyin Chigu was a genius of the Pardon Sky clan, but his importance was obviously incomparable to the great priest of Pardon Sky. Pardon Tianjin felt that whether it was from the perspective of the Pardon Sky clan or Aoyin Chigu had to apologize to Nietian. Ninth Elder, I can spare his life, but I won't apologize. Aoyin Chigu fell silent for a moment before he suddenly raised his head and looked at Pardon Tianjin with a determined expression. His expression was clearly saying, I won't apologize even if you kill me. Xietian Chigu, there's a limit to my patience. You'd better. Xietian Jun's face darkened. His aura surged like an enraged wild beast. Ninth Elder, however, he was interrupted by Nietian before he could finish his sentence. The latter chuckled and said, Aoyin Chigu did nothing wrong. There's no need to apologize to me. Great priest, you're magnanimous. Pardon Tianjin frowned as he was slightly surprised. He then let out a hollow laugh and said, I'm impressed. You flatter me, Ninth Elder. Nietian smiled faintly as he glanced at the 7 bones of pardoning heaven and didn't say anything else. Aoyin Chigu was a genius, and all geniuses had their own pride. If Aoyin Chigu was forced to lower his head today, it would definitely be a hindrance to his martial Dao growth in the future. Aoyin Chigu's attitude toward Nietian was indeed not good, but it was not too much. Chapter 40:10. Upon hearing Nietian's words, the 7 bones of pardoning heaven's eyes flickered involuntarily, and they jerked their heads up to look at Nietian with astonishment written all over their faces, as if they were wondering if they had heard wrong. He had never expected Nietian to speak up for him. He had tried to kill Nietian many times. If someone had tried to kill him several times, not killing the person was already his biggest concession. He would never speak up for the person. Aoyin Chigu, it's true that I am the great priest of Xietian. However, my identity will not be an obstacle to you. Nietian looked at Aoyin Chigu and said with a faint smile, If you want to kill me or challenge me, I will accept your challenge anytime. Aoyin Chigu's eyes quivered and the shock on his face became more obvious. Nietian's words had surprised him again. Xietian Jun looked at Nietian and his eyes flickered in astonishment. He had originally thought that Nietian was merely a martial artist with terrifying talent in martial arts. However, he had never expected Nietian to be even more terrifying and shrewd. What he had said earlier was not something that an ordinary martial artist could say. At that moment, Xietian Jun finally understood that Nietian's strength was not only because of his talent, but also because of his heart. Nietian, I lost this round. I accept it wholeheartedly. Aoyin Chigu fell silent for a while. His eyes quivered and his lips curled into a smile. He said, However, I will not admit defeat. I look forward to our next battle. Nietian smiled and said, Aoyin Chigu, I just want you to know that not only the martial artists from the ancient sacred tribe can be called geniuses. There are also geniuses among us from other tribes. Aoyin Chigu's eyes dimmed, and he nodded in silence. On the other side, Wu Luofeng's face grew gloomy as he witnessed the scene. He didn't expect things to turn out like this. Wu Luofeng, are you still not leaving? At this moment, Xie Tianjin spoke in a cold tone. His eyes were filled with threatening intent. High Priest of Pardon Heaven, is it? Wu Luofeng's gaze was deep and cold as it locked onto Nietian. He said in a deep voice, We shall meet again. As soon as he finished speaking, his silhouette moved and he left. This guy doesn't seem like someone who will let this go easily. Nietian looked at the place where Wu Luofeng's figure had disappeared and the corners of his mouth curled up. He laughed bitterly in his heart. High Priest, let's go, Xie Tianjin said with a faint smile as he arrived beside Nietian. Is there no need to test it? Nietian raised his eyebrows and laughed. Xie Tianjin also smiled and said, The Blade 9 killing formation can't trap you, and Aoyin Chigu and Wu Luofeng can't kill you together. The overcast moon forest no longer has any meaning to you. That's true. Nietian smiled and looked at Tang 13 and the others. He said, Let's go together. Xie Tianjin only smiled. Of course, he wouldn't reject. Then, Under Xie Tianjin's lead, Nye Tian and the others left the Moon Forest and arrived at the core of the Pardon Heaven clan, the Pardon Heaven City. After entering the Pardon Heaven City, Xie Tianjin brought Nye Tian and the others into the Bloodnet Manor and arranged a big yard for them to rest. In the yard, everyone from the Pardon Heaven clan had left. Only Nye Tian, Mori Shire, Heaven Saintess, Tang 13, Tang Yu, and Jun Jinxing were left. Nye Tian, how did you become the high priest of the Pardon Heaven clan? Tang 13 looked at Nye Tian and couldn't help but ask with a smile. It was an accident. Nye Tian smiled and didn't explain in detail. Tang 13 was speechless. Then her eyes flickered and she said, I heard you have a lot of sacred rheumatism. Is that true? Nye Tian smiled again. Without hesitation, he took out 1,000 bottles of sacred rheumatism and gave them to Tang 13. These are yours. This. Tang 13 was stunned. She was stunned for a few seconds before she reacted. Heaven's Saintess' eyes trembled at this scene. Her expression didn't look too good. She risked her life to get 100 bottles of sacred rheumatism from Nye Tian. Who knew that Nye Tian would easily get 1,000 bottles of sacred rheumatism from Mori Shire with just a few words and give them to Tang 13. Jun Jinxing, you probably won't need too much. Here are 100 bottles. Just then, Nye Tian looked at Jun Jinxing and handed him another 100 bottles. Okay. Jun Jinxing didn't refuse. He nodded with a smile and put away the bottles of sacred rheumatism. Heaven's Saintess' face froze. She couldn't speak for a long time. Nye Tian gave away such precious sacred rheumatism like they were cabbages. Then, the few of them chatted for a while more before finding their own rooms to rest in. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 days passed. When Nye Tian walked out of his room, he was glowing. His aura was much stronger than before. His injuries were completely healed, and he was in peak condition. He glanced at the others. They were all still in their rooms. It was obvious that they had all taken the sacred rheumatism and were absorbing it well. It's him. At that moment, Nye Tian sensed that someone was coming. He took a few steps forward and frowned in surprise when he saw a figure walking toward him. He didn't expect the person to be Shi Tianluan. Although Shi Tianluan didn't attack Nye Tian directly before, she really wanted to kill Nye Tian. Shi Tianluan greets the high priest. Shi Tianluan walked into the courtyard and stopped a few meters away from Nye Tian. She bowed deeply in a respectful manner. Again, Nye Tian was startled at first, but he soon asked with a smile. Shi Tianluan's attitude changed so quickly that he couldn't get used to it. High priest, the clan leader, and the great elder would like to see you. Shi Tianluan looked up and said respectfully. Then let's go, Nye Tian said with a frown. Pardon Tian Ichi and Zhuqian Wanchuan had never appeared since he came to the Bloodnet Manor. Why would they want to see him now? Shi Tianluan, do you know why the clan leader and the great elder are looking for me? Nye Tian couldn't help but ask along the way. It seems that the other 3 ancient sacred clans are here. The clan leader and the great elder have something to discuss with you. Shi Tianluan nodded with a smile. The other 3 ancient sacred clans? Nye Tian frowned and his eyes flickered. What are they here for? I don't know. Shi Tianluan shook her head. Nye Tian's lips twitched. Could it be that the other 3 clans are here to see me, the great priest of Pardon Tian? Out of the 4 ancient sacred clans, Nye Tian had only seen the Pardon Tian clan and the Sorcerer clan. He had never seen the other 2 clans. He couldn't help but feel a little excited. After a while, Nye Tian and Shi Tianluan arrived at the hall of the Bloodnet Manor. They saw a few figures sitting in the hall from afar. The atmosphere seemed to be gloomy. Chapter 4011. When Nye Tian saw that Wu Luophone was there, he knew that something bad was about to happen. High Priestess, I'll take my leave, Pardon Tianjin said as he bowed slightly to Nye Tian and left. Nye Tian forced a smile and walked to the hall. Grand Elder, it's him. In the hall, Wu Luophone stared at Nye Tian from afar. His eyes were filled with hatred as he whispered to a short and fat old man in front of him. The short and fat old man was the Grand Elder of Wu Luo tribe, Wu Luoxin. He's so young. Wu Luoxin lifted his head and looked at Nye Tian. His eyes quivered and he was shocked. He had not expected Nyetian to be so young. Before he came to Pardon Sky City, he had already heard some information about Nyetian from Wu Luofeng. He knew that Nyetian was a young martial artist from another tribe. However, he had not expected him to be so young. At the same time, the people from the other two tribes were equally shocked. The way they looked at Nyetian became strange. Tribe leader, Grand Elder. At this moment, Nyetian arrived in the hall, and he bowed slightly towards Pardon Heaven Ichi and Pardon Heaven Wangchuan as he spoke indifferently. Grand Priest, please take a seat. Xietian Ichi nodded and said with a smile. In the hall, there were 3 main seats in the middle. Xietian Ichi sat in the middle, while Jiutian Wangchuan sat on his left and right. The seat on his right was reserved for Nyetian, the Grand Priest. In Pardon Sky Clan, the clan leader, the Grand Elder, and the Grand Priest were of equal status. However, if one were to compare, the clan leader was the most important. Hence, Xietian Ichi had the right to sit in the middle of the 3 main seats. The people from the other 3 tribes were guests. Hence, they naturally sat on the 2 sides. Thank you, Clanmaster. Nyetian expressed his gratitude and strode forward. Wait! However, at this moment, an unfriendly voice could be heard as a tall and sturdy elder stood up. Coldness could be seen in his eyes as he stared at Nyetian. Little friend, who are you to actually dare to sit at the head of the table? Nyetian furrowed his brows for a moment. Then he smiled and said, Old man, are you so old that your ears can't hear clearly? Didn't you hear Lord Patriarch addressing me as High Priest just now? High Priest? The elder sneered. His nostrils were so high that they could almost be filled. He said in a mocking tone, Excuse me, what kind of High Priest are you? High Priest of Pardon Heaven. Nyetian's eyes darkened as he replied in a cold tone. This old man was simply looking for trouble, which made him a little impatient. Really? The old man replied coldly, and then his eyes suddenly sank. He took a step forward and roared, Let's see if you, the High Priest of Amnesty Heaven, are qualified. Boom! As soon as the words were spoken, a tremendous aura appeared from the void and descended onto Nyetian. Nyetian's expression flickered involuntarily as he felt the enormous pressure. His legs actually trembled, and the profound stone floor under his feet directly crumbled. At this moment, he felt a deep sense of despair. This kind of pressure was not something he could resist. He did not expect this old man to attack him in front of Pardon Heaven Ichi and Jiutian Wangchuan. Elder Guiji, you've crossed the line. At this moment, Jiutian Wangchuan stood up and waved his hand. A gentle force swept across, and Nyetian could feel the pressure on him disappearing. Jiutian Wangchuan, is I crossing the line? Guiji and Xiang Long's faces darkened as they glared at Jiutian Wangchuan cold and growled. When your Pardon Heaven clan appointed him as the High Priest, did you ever think about our 3 clans? Nyetian was startled. What does my appointment as the Great Priest have to do with the other 3 clans? Elder Giji, your 3 clans have come here to discuss the matter regarding the High Priestess. Nyetian's identity has yet to be acknowledged by you, yet you've attacked him. Aren't you looking down on our Pardon Heaven clan a little too much? Xietian Ichi said in a deep voice. Fine. Guiji and Xiang Long's eyes flickered as they uttered a roar. I'll assume that I was being reckless. I would like to see how your Pardon Heaven clan is going to explain this to us. After saying this, Guiji and Xiang Long returned to their seats, but their faces were even darker than before. Could it be that, as High Priest of Pardon Heaven, he really had connections with the other 3 races? Nyetian, take a seat. Pardon Heaven Ichi frowned as he gestured for Nyetian to sit beside him. Nyetian nodded and found himself a random seat. At that instant, he could not help but have a bad feeling. Pardon Heaven Ichi had called him by his name and asked him to sit aside. Is he giving up on his position as the Great Priest? Clan leader Pardon Heaven, since your Great Priest is here, let's hear it. At that instant, Wu Luo clan's first elder, Wu Luo Xian, let out a laugh. His gaze toward Pardon Heaven Ichi was filled with a strong hint of playfulness. Pardon Heaven Ichi nodded and took a deep breath before he said, Everyone, The young man before you is named Nyatan, who was recently appointed as the new great priest of our Pardon Heaven clan. The others wore cold grins as they glanced at Nyatan disdainfully. Pardon Heaven Ichi had expected this, thus he was not bothered by it, and continued. Nyatan, allow me to introduce you to everyone here. This is Gue Ji clan's first elder, Gue Ji Xianglong. This is Wu Luo clan's first elder, Wu Luo Xian. And this is the Imperial Martial clan's first elder, Imperial Martial Shenyang. Nyatan glanced at them and nodded slightly as a greeting after hearing Pardon Heaven Ichi's introduction. Gue Ji, Wu Luo, Imperial Martial clan, and Pardon Heaven. The people of the 4 ancient sacred tribes were all here. Nyatan was still confused. He was only the great priest of the Pardon Heaven clan. Was there a need for the other 3 clans to show up here? Gue Ji, Wu Luo, and the Imperial Martial clan had brought a few young cultivators with them, apart from their first elder. Clan leader Pardon Heaven, there's no need to waste your breath. Gue Ji Xianglong blurted out. Your Pardon Heaven clan recognizes the great priest, but not our Gue Ji clan. Humph. Our Wu Luo clan doesn't recognize the great priest either. Before he could finish his sentence, Wu Luo Xian spoke in a cold manner. The Imperial Martial clan doesn't recognize the great priest either. Following that, Imperial Martial Shenyang also spoke with a cold expression. The great elders of the 3 clans expressed their disapproval of Nyatan. Nyatan's expression changed as he glanced at the 3 of them. He was confused. I'm the great priest of the Pardon Heaven clan. Does it matter if the other 3 clans recognize me or not? Chapter 4012. Gue Ji, Wu Luo, and the Imperial Martial tribe expressed their disapproval of Nyatian's identity as the great priest of Pardon Heaven, causing Nyatian to be confused. On the other hand, Xietian Ichi and Zhouqian Wangchuan had unpleasant looks on their faces, indicating that they were very concerned about the attitudes of the other 3 tribes. Both Xietian Ichi and Xietian Wangchuan didn't say anything. The atmosphere in the hall became extremely oppressive, so heavy that it was suffocating. Elders, forgive me for being confused, but does my appointment as the great priest of Pardon Heaven have anything to do with the 3 tribes? Nyatian could not help but ask with a frown. Gue Ji, Xiang Dragon, Wu Luoxin, and the Imperial Martial Divine Son were startled before a cold grin appeared on their faces. Elders, if you have something to say, just say it. Nyatian couldn't help but feel a bit angry, and said coldly, Kid, I bet you don't know that the 4 ancient sacred tribes share the same origin. You should understand what it means to share the same breath and branches. Wu Luoxin let out a hollow laugh and said, Most importantly, according to the rules of the 4 ancient sacred tribes, the great priest of the 4 ancient sacred tribes must be the same person. In other words, not only will you be the great priest of the Pardon Heaven tribe, you will also be the great priest of the other 3 tribes. If the other 3 tribes disagree, don't even think about becoming the great priest. Upon saying this, Wu Luoxin let out a hollow laugh as his eyes emitted an icy glow. An outsider wanting to be the grand priest of one of the 4 ancient saint clans was simply wishful thinking. Nyatian's expression darkened. He did not expect this to happen. It turned out that the 4 ancient sacred tribes shared a great priest. If he were to become the great priest of Pardon Heaven, he would also be the great priest of the other 3 tribes. His status would most likely be higher than the 4 ancient sacred tribes' leaders and great elders. Kid, do you know that the position of the great priest has ceased to exist in the 4 ancient sacred tribes a long time ago? Then Gue Ji and Xiang Dragon said coldly, If you want to be the high priest of the 4 races, you will have to gain the approval of at least 3 races. Just the Pardon Sky Clan's approval, you are too big. I can't be a priest. Nyatian furrowed his brows as his expression turned ugly. He raised his head to look at Xietian Ichi and Zhouqian Wangchuan. Both of their expressions were ugly as well. The 4 ancient sacred clans had abolished the position of high priest because it was too difficult to decide. The high priest had to be recognized by at least 3 races. It would be best if all four races recognized him. In the past, the High Priestess had always been chosen from the most powerful and well-respected experts of the four races. Furthermore, it had always been very troublesome, and there were times when the High Priestess would even stir up conflicts between the four races. Although the four races were connected, in the end, they were still separated. Because the High Priest was shared by all four races, this position was extremely important. Just think about it. Which clan did not wish for the High Priestess to be their own clansman? It was precisely because of this that every time a new High Priest was chosen, the four clans would have a huge disagreement. In the end, they would even fight each other. After that, for the sake of peace among the four races reached an agreement to abolish the position of the High Priest. Under such circumstances, the four races had maintained peace for hundreds of thousands of years. However, because the High Priest no longer existed, the relationship between the four races was no longer as close as before. Now, the Seation clan had suddenly found a martialist from another race and appointed him as the High Priest of Seation. How could the other three races accept this? The High Priest of the four races had a highly respected status. Even if the position was chosen from the senior experts of the four races, there would still be people who would not accept it, let alone a young martialist from another race. At this moment, the great elders of the other three races had appeared at the same time. They were already being very polite by not killing Yetion right away. Kid, the martial royal tribe will never accept an outsider as the great priest. At that moment, the martial royal divine son also spoke with a cold and resolute expression. Yetion frowned and did not speak. The current situation wasn't something he could control at all. What would happen next would depend on how Seation Ichi and Seation Wanchuan dealt with it. Then, Wu Luoxin looked at Seation Ichi and Zhoutian Wanchuan and said with a gloomy expression, "Clan leader Seation, great elder Seation, the three races have expressed their stance. What else do you have to say?" Seation Ichi's eyes flickered slightly. He scanned the three great elders and finally fixed his gaze on Yetion. He fell silent for a long time before he suddenly stood up and said, "Elder Gueji, Elder Wuluo, Martial Divine Elder, Yetion, as the High Priest belongs to the Seation clan. It has nothing to do with you. Yetion will only participate in the matters of the Seation clan. He will not participate in the matters of the three races. Is that okay?" As his voice faded, parting heaven Wang Chuan's eyes trembled and his face froze. Yetion was also stunned and shocked. He knew that Seation Ichi saying this was equivalent to falling out with the other three clans. Sure enough, the faces of the three great elders of the three clans instantly became gloomy, appearing to be extremely angry. "Patriarch Seation, have you forgotten the rules of the four ancient saint clans? The High Priest has always belonged to the four races." Gueji Long Xiang was the first to stand up. He said solemnly, "Your Pardon Heaven clan has a High Priest. This is a blatant violation of the clan rules. Could it be that your Pardoning Heaven clan is going to leave? For ancient sacred clans?" Elder Giji is right. The four ancient sacred clans are of the same bloodline. Your Pardon Sky clan is humiliating the other three clans by finding an outsider to be the great priest. The Wu Luo tribe will never allow such a thing to happen. Then Wu Luo Xian stood up. His eyes were extremely gloomy and actually revealed a wisp of killing intent. "That's right." Then the martial divine son stood up and said in a loud voice, "The four ancient sacred clans have always had one high priest. The Pardoning Heaven clan is challenging the other three clans by wanting to have their own high priest." The three figures stood up and slightly released their auras, causing the atmosphere in the hall to become tense. Suddenly, there was a sense of tension. "Elders, please calm down." Upon seeing this, Zhiqian Wanchuan's face darkened. He quickly stood up and said, "The Pardoning Heaven clan will never leave the four ancient sacred clans, nor will we humiliate the other three clans. As for the great priest, we will discuss it slowly. The three great elders of the three clans were not to be underestimated. They could speak on behalf of the three clans. From the looks of it, The three great elders were going to join forces and cause trouble for the Pardoning Heaven clan. The Pardoning Heaven clan was not the strongest among the four ancient sacred clans. If the other three clans were to join forces, the Pardoning Heaven clan would surely be destroyed. Under such circumstances, how could Zhou Wangchuan not be anxious? Although Zhou Wangchuan had lowered his voice, the three great elders remained standing. They had no intention of sitting down. Zhou Wangchuan frowned and looked curiously at the Pardoning Heaven clan. Chapter 40:13. Kill him. Wu Luoxin's deep voice echoed in the crowd's ears like a clap of thunder. Nie Tian's pupils constricted as a rumbling sound echoed out in his head. He did not expect the first elders of the three clans to want his life. The eyes of Xie Tian Yiqi and Zhou Wangchuan flickered as their expressions stiffened. The atmosphere at the scene turned tense once again. Both Xie Tian Yiqi and Zhou Wangchuan wore gloomy expressions and remained silent for a long time. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he stared nervously at the two people with the highest positions in the Xie Tian clan. Their attitude would decide his life or death. If the first elders of the three clans wanted him dead, he would not stand a chance with his current strength. Do you two have the same thought? A moment later, Xie Tian Yiqi spoke and asked Guiji, Long Xiang, and the Imperial Marshal Sunday. Wu Luoxin had already stated his intention to take Nie Tian's life. Guiji and the Imperial Marshal Sun most likely had the same thought, but Xie Tian Yiqi still had to ask. Clan leader Xie Tian, this kid is an outsider. It's an insult to the four ancient sacred clans to appoint him as the great priest. Guiji and Long Xiang spoke in a deep voice. Do you think the four ancient sacred clans will keep him alive if he can't become the great priest? An outsider's death is not to be regretted. The Imperial Marshal Sun's response was simple and firm. The attitude of the three clans was clear. They wanted Nie Tian dead. This is going to be troublesome. Seeing this scene, Nie Tian could not help but frown and smile bitterly in his heart. It would depend on how determined the Xie Tian clan was to protect him. Xie Tian Yiqi's face was gloomy, and his eyes flickered with a cold light. He was like a terrifying lion. He did not speak for a long time, as if he was making a difficult decision. Indeed, it was an extremely difficult choice for him. He had a vague feeling that it was a choice that concerned the survival of the Parting Sky clan. Patriarch Xie Tian, is it difficult for you to kill an ant from another race? At this moment, Wu Luoxin seemed to have lost his patience. His eyes were cold as he looked at Xie Tian Yiqi and said playfully. Xie Tian Yiqi suddenly raised his head, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. His face instantly turned cold as he stared at Wu Luoxin and said slowly, Nie Tian is the great priest of Xie Tian, not an ant. The deep voice resounded in everyone's ears like a clap of thunder from the nine heavens, exploding with a loud bang. The faces of everyone present sank, and they were all stunned on the spot. They were completely speechless. Even Zhou Wangchuan wore a shocked expression. Obviously, he did not expect Xie Tian Yiqi to choose to protect Nie Tian. If they protected Nie Tian, it would mean that the Heaven Pardoning clan would become the enemy of the other three outsider races. Was it really worth it to completely fall out with the other three clans for a mere Nie Tian? Zhou Wangchuan knew that Xie Tian Yiqi hoped that the other three clans would acknowledge Nie Tian's identity, but he did not expect Xie Tian Yiqi to place such importance on Nie Tian. Nie Tian, an outsider, was it really worth it for Xie Tian Yiqi to bet the entire Parting Sky clan? Patriarch Xie Tian, are you really going to go against the three clans for an outsider? Wu Luoxin's face darkened for a long time before he finally reacted and let out a cold growl. His body trembled slightly, showing his extreme anger. Patriarch Xie Tian, I don't know what's so important about this kid. Guiji Long Xiang's eyes flickered as he said, but I have to remind you that the decision you are making now is not only your own will, but also the will of the entire Parting Sky clan. Therefore, your words will decide the future of the Parting Sky clan. Between an outsider and the entire Parting Sky clan, I don't think I need to tell you which is more important, right? Brother Guiji is right. Before Guei and Xiang Dragon could finish their words, Imperial Marshal Divine Sun stood up and stared at Xietian Ichi with a gloomy expression. Clan Master Xietian, even if you don't think for yourself, you must think for the entire Xietian clan. Have you really thought about this decision? The three elders pressured Xietian Ichi together once again. They knew that if the three clans were to declare war against the Pardon Sky clan, even if they won in the end, they would still have to pay a price. Therefore, the best scenario for them was to force the Pardon Sky clan to kill Nietian and obtain some benefits from the Pardon Sky clan's compromise. They did not expect Xietian Ichi's attitude to be so firm. I've thought it through clearly. Xietian Ichi spoke as soon as the Imperial Marshal Divine Sun finished speaking. His voice was cold and filled with extreme determination. This, Zhuqian Wangchuan's expression darkened as his eyes trembled vigorously. He was at a loss for words. As the first elder, he had always supported Xietian Ichi and rarely disagreed with him. However, this time, the situation was too serious. Thus he began to hesitate. Patriarch Xietian, are you really going to insist on this? Wu Luoxin's eyes darkened as the fat on his face trembled. It was obvious that he was suppressing his anger. It doesn't matter if the three clans admit it or not. Nietian is still the great oracle of the Pardon Sky clan. Xietian Ichi said in a heavy tone. Elder Xietian, do you agree with Patriarch Xietian's decision? At that instant, Guei Long Xiang's eyes flickered slightly as he looked at Jiutian Wangchuan and asked. Jiutian Wangchuan's expression stiffened. He did not know what to say. He was a smart man and was able to see things clearly. If he agreed with Xietian Ichi, there would be no way for the Pardon Sky clan to redeem themselves from the other three clans. On the other hand, if he did not agree with Xietian Ichi, the consequences would be even more severe. If the Patriarch and the First Elder had a disagreement, and it was related to the future of the clan, it would undoubtedly cause the Pardon Sky clan to fall apart or even trigger an internal war. The other three clans would be happy to see an internal war in the Pardon Sky clan. Jiutian Wangchuan and Xietian Ichi had worked together for many years. Thus he knew the latter's character very well. Once he had made up his mind, he would never turn back. Therefore, there was only one choice in front of pardoning Tian Wangchuan at this moment. Agree to pardoning Tian Ichi and protect Nietian with his life. Elder Xietian, you better think it through before you give us your answer. Wu Luoxin looked at Jiutian Wangchuan and said in a deep voice, I've thought it through. Lord Patriarch's words are my answer. Pardoning Heaven Wangchuan's eyes darkened slightly. In an instant, he became much more resolute as he spoke in a heavy tone. As soon as he finished speaking, Wu Luoxin, Guei Long Xiang, and the Imperial Marshal Godson were startled, as if they were about to lose control of themselves like three wild beasts. Pardon Sky Clan, the Shaman Luo tribe accept your answer. However, you better be prepared to face the wrath of the Shaman Luo tribe. Wu Luoxin roared after a long silence. Chapter 4014. Guei Wu Luo, and the Imperial Marshal clan all reacted strongly and declared war on the Pardon Sky clan. Xietian Ichi stood in the middle of the hall and glanced at the three elders. He said in a deep voice, the Pardon Sky clan is not afraid of any challenge. Very well. Guei and Xiang Dragon roared and turned around to leave. Since the negotiation had failed, there was no point in staying here any longer. Young man, I don't know what you did to make the Pardon Sky clan protect you so much. Wu Luoxin glanced at Xietian Ichi and glanced at Nietian. He said in a cold voice, but let me tell you, you have started a civil war between the four ancient holy clans. You will die a horrible death. Nietian frowned and did not speak. He did not expect things to turn out this way. Let's go. Then, the Imperial Marshal Godyong said in a cold voice. The three clans then walked out of the hall. Wait. Suddenly, a cold and deep voice was heard, carrying with it a strong and oppressive aura. The three elders paused and were stunned. Clan leader Xietian, are you going to kill us here? Wu Luoxin turned around to look at Xietian Ichi and asked coldly. Clan leader Xietian, You sure are cunning. Could it be that the parting Sky Clan sent us here was a trap? Gui Ji and Xiang Dragon snickered coldly. Elders, don't worry. I am not that cunning. Xietian Ichi snickered and said, I just want to show you something. What do you want to see? The Imperial Martial God Yang was the most impulsive among the three. He growled, If you want to fight the Imperial Martial God Yang, will fight you to the end. Xietian Ichi glanced at the Imperial Martial God Yang and did not say anything. Instead, he turned to Juqian Wanchuan and said, Great Elder, go get ninth brother. All right. Juqian Wanchuan's eyes flickered as if he had thought of something. He agreed and dashed out of the hall. Elder Yu, let's not be impatient. Let's wait and see what he can take out. Wu Luoxin's face was dark and cold. All right. Martial Divine Son nodded and said, If what I see is useless, then don't blame me for getting angry. Don't worry, you will definitely be interested. Xietian Ichi laughed and said faintly. A few moments later, Juqian Wanchuan arrived with ninth elder, Jie Tianjin. It's him. Could it be? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he saw Xie Tianjin. He seemed to have thought of something, and his brows knitted even tighter. Lord Patriarch. Xie Tianjin came to the hall and glanced at Nie Tian before coming to Xie Tainaiki's side and being respectful. Ninth elder, do you still have the thing you showed me and the great elder a few days ago? Xie Tainaiki nodded and asked. Yes, Xie Tianjin answered and took out a scroll. He then passed it to Xie Tainaiki. Open it and let the three elders have a look. Xie Tainaiki nodded and said. Yes. Xie Tianjin glanced at Wu Luoxin and the other two elders. Then he opened the scroll. Countless rays of light flew out and formed an image in the air. I knew it. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he realized what was going on. The image showed the moment when he entered the Yin Moon Forest. What's there to see? Martial Divine Son sneered, and his expression was cold. If Xie Tainaiki only wanted them to watch Nie Tian train in the Yin Moon Forest, he would forget about it. Elder Imperial Marshal, don't be anxious. Xie Tian Ichi smiled faintly with an indifferent expression. Then the image showed Nie Tian and Doomsday falling into the Yin Blade 9 Murders Formation. This is the Yin Blade 9 Murders Formation. Wu Luoxin's eyes trembled, and he was extremely shocked. The Yin Moon Forest was the training ground for the young martial artists of the Xietian clan. Sometimes, young martial artists from the other 3 clans would enter the forest too. Wu Luoxin was knowledgeable, and he knew about the Yin Blade 9 Murders Formation. At this moment, he couldn't help but glance at Nie Tian, wondering how the latter had managed to walk out of the killing formation. However, what happened next shocked him even more. Out Yin Shigu appeared. Nie Tian and Mori Shire escaped from the Yin Blade 9 Murders Formation and fought against Out Yin Shigu together. Then, a series of events happened one after another. Wu Luoxin and the other 2 elders were bored at first. However, the more they watched, the more excited they became. Especially after Wu Luofeng appeared. The image of Nie Tian and the others fighting in Wu Luo's dark world was too terrifying. Wu Luoxin and the other 2 elders were the great elders of the ancient sacred tribe, and their strength was at the peak of the Sky Martial Divine ancestor level. To them, the battle between Nie Tian and the others was not worth mentioning at all. However, it made their blood boil. They could not imagine how a level 2 heavenly righteousness great lord could fight against an expert like Wu Luofeng. Wu Luoxin was the great elder of the Wu Luo clan. He knew how powerful Wu Luofeng was. Nie Tian actually relied on his own strength to almost break Wu Luofeng's blood overarching dark world. This was too terrifying. Based on this, no one in the 4 ancient sacred clans could be compared to Nie Tian in terms of talent. At that moment, Wu Luoxin finally understood why Xie Tian Ichi would protect Nie Tian to the death. Nie Tian's talent was too terrifying. Soon, the 3 elders finished watching everything that had happened in the Shadow Moon Forest. They were all shocked. They had to admit that Nie Tian was indeed terrifying. Such a martial artist would definitely be at the peak of the peak when he grew up. It was no exaggeration to say that if Nietian reached level 9 of the Sky Martial Realm, he would definitely crush all the martial artists in the all-heaven sacred world. High Chieftain Sietian, you're only showing us these things because you want to tell us that this Nietian kid is very talented. After a while, Guiji and Xiang Dragon spoke. They were much calmer now and said, "But no matter how talented he is not qualified to be the great priest of the 4 clans." Elder Guiji is right. No matter how terrifying this kid is, he is still an outsider and has yet to grow up. How can he be the great priest? The Imperial Divine Son sneered. He does have the potential of a hidden dragon. Wu Luoxin glanced at Nietian in shock and fear. He said, "But now, he is yet to reach the sky. Because he is a hidden dragon, he must die." Wu Luoxin could no longer suppress his murderous intent and released it. The entire hall was filled with a terrifying murderous intent. Nietian was too powerful. He could not be allowed to continue growing. Therefore, he had to be killed. Looking at the 3 of them, Sietian Ichi didn't seem too surprised. Instead, he asked with a faint smile, "Do you know who was the first person to acknowledge Nietian as the High Priestess?" "Who?" The 3 of them were shocked and asked at the same time. "The ancestor of our clan, Ancestor Shueluo," Sietian Ichi said in a deep voice as a strange light flickered in his eyes. "Ancestor Shueluo." The 3 of them exclaimed in shock. They never expected Ancestor Shueluo to appear. Chapter 40:15. The Prophecy Child. The 4 words were like 4 claps of thunder that resounded in the ears of Guiji, Wu Luo, and Wu Luo. They were dumbfounded and could not speak for a long time. The Prophecy Child. Nietian frowned when he saw the abnormal reactions of Wu Luoxin and the others. He mumbled to himself, wondering what the 4 words meant. He can't be the Prophecy Child. Wu Luoxin finally regained his senses after half a day. He stared at Nietian in shock, and his voice was trembling. The Prophecy Child? How could he be an outsider? Guiji and Xiang Dragon were equally shocked. They stared at Nietian and were clearly panicking. Outsider? How could he be an outsider? The Imperial Battle God's son screamed in shock, as if he had gone mad. What is the Prophecy Child? Nietian frowned when he saw their reactions. He was even more confused. It seemed like the Prophecy Child was someone important to the 4 ancient sacred clans. Could Nietian be the Prophecy Child that Sietian Ichi had mentioned? Elders, when the prophecy appeared in the ancient firmament world, it did not state that the child of the prophecy could not be an outsider. Sietian Ichi's eyes sank slightly as a strange light flickered in his eyes. The Imperial Battle God's son's eyes trembled as he stared at Nietian. He was speechless. Clan leader Sietian, you said that the first person to admit Nietian's identity was Ancestor Shueluo. What's going on? Wu Luoxin was calmer as he asked Sietian Ichi. Sietian Ichi's gaze shifted as he glanced at Sietian Wangchuan. The latter understood and recounted everything that had happened earlier. He discovered the heart of rheumatism and awakened the remnant of Ancestor Shueluo's soul. Wu Luoxin was astonished. He had not expected Nietian to have done so much for the Pardon Sky clan. No wonder the Pardon Sky clan was so protective of Nietian. As a member of the 4 ancient sacred clans, Wu Luoxin understood the importance of sacred color rheumatism to the Pardoning Sky clan. Could this kid really be the Prophecy Child? The Imperial Martial Divine Son exclaimed in shock as he looked at Nietian with unconcealable fear and dread. Elder Yu, everything is just a guess. Don't scare yourself. Guiji and Xiang Long's faces darkened, and they spoke in a cold tone. However, the look in his eyes was clearly not very confident. He was clearly worried about something. Whether he is the prophesied child or not, we will know once we bring him to the ancient Sky Dome. At that moment, Wu Luoxin's eyes flickered with a strange light as he said in a deep voice, "This." The Martial Divine Son was taken aback. "I'm afraid that's not a good idea." "Yeah." Guiji and Xiang Long furrowed their brows and said, "The ancient firmament is the birthplace of our 4 ancient saint clans. It is also the most sacred land of our 4 clans. Since the ancient times, Only the noblest of our 4 clans are allowed to enter. It is indeed inappropriate for an outsider to enter the ancient firmament. The ancient firmament was the birthplace of the 4 ancient Saint clans. It was the most sacred land of the 4 clans. Even a martial artist of the 4 clans could only enter the ancient firmament, let alone outsiders. Now that Wu Luoxin wanted to bring Niet Tian into the ancient firmament, the others naturally disagreed. What should we do then? Wu Luoxin frowned and asked in a deep voice. The Imperial Martial Divine Son's face stiffened and he was stunned speechless. He really did not know what to do. Although he was unwilling to admit it, he had already guessed that Niet Tian could be the legendary prophecy child. If Niet Tian was really the prophecy child, then killing him would undoubtedly bring disaster to the 4 ancient Saint clans. If they did not kill Niet Tian, they would have to acknowledge his identity as the great priest, which was not acceptable either. If Niet Tian was the prophecy child, then he was naturally worthy of the title of the great priest of the 4 clans. However, what if he was not? The situation seemed to be in a dilemma. Could it be that we have no choice but to bring him to the ancient firmament? The Gui Xiang dragon's face was gloomy. After a long silence, he spoke in a deep voice. In my opinion, we should bring him to the ancient firmament now. If he is not the prophecy child, then the ancient firmament will be the last thing he sees. Wu Luoxin's face was gloomy, and he spoke in a cold voice. The Imperial Martial Divine Son and the Gui Xiang dragon's expressions changed when they heard Wu Luoxin's words. Wu Luoxin had made it very clear that if they arrived at the ancient firmament and proved that Niet Tian was not the prophecy child, then they would kill him. Elder Wu Luoxin, what if Niet Tian is the prophecy child? At that moment, Xie Tianichi's lips twitched, and he asked with a smile. Wu Luoxin frowned and did not speak. If he can prove that he is the prophecy child, the Imperial Martial Clan will acknowledge his identity as the great priest. The Imperial Martial Divine Son's eyes trembled, and he said directly, if the prophecy child becomes the great priest of the 4 clans, the Gui clan will naturally not object. The Gui Xiang dragon thought for a while and said in a deep voice. Wu Luoxin suddenly lifted his head and glanced at the Imperial Martial Divine Son and the Gui Xiang dragon. After hesitating for a long time, he finally nodded his head and said, as you wish, elders. Xie Tianichi nodded his head in satisfaction and said, let's not waste any more time. Let's bring Niet Tian to the ancient firmament now. All right. The 3 elders looked at each other and nodded their heads. The higher-ups of the 4 ancient sacred clans had decided to bring Niet Tian to the ancient firmament. Wait a minute. However, at that moment, Wu Luofeng, who was behind Wu Luoxin, stood out and said, elders, isn't it too reckless to bring a foreign martial artist to the ancient firmament? Xie Tianichi glanced at Wu Luofeng and frowned. He did not speak, but looked at Wu Luoxin. What he meant was obvious. Wu Luofeng had no right to speak. Wu Luofeng, what are you trying to say? Wu Luoxin did not stop Wu Luofeng, but asked cold. Elders, if you think he is the prophesied child, why don't you let us test his abilities first? Wu Luofeng laughed and said, if he cannot even defeat us, how can he be the prophesied child? What do you think? Wu Luoxin's eyes dimmed, and he agreed with Wu Luofeng's suggestion. That works too. The Gui Xiang dragon creased his eyebrows and nodded his head. The Imperial Martial Divine Son's face darkened, and he did not speak. Wu Luofeng, you really don't know shame. At that moment, Juqian Wanchuan spoke and said, what are your abilities and what is Niet Tian's? With your cultivation states, isn't it too much to ask Niet Tian to fight against you? Niet Tian did not speak at the side. Juqian Wanchuan spoke his mind. Chapter 40:16. Grand Elder Xie Tian, calm down. Wu Luofeng looked at Juqian Wanchuan and smiled. He said, since Niet Tian might be the prophecy child, why would we bully him? Young man, if you really want to fight, suppress your cultivation level to the same level as Niet Tian. Juqian Wanchuan sneered and said, if that's the case, I have no objections. Juqian Wanchuan knew how powerful Niet Tian was. If Wu Luofeng and the rest suppressed their cultivation level, they would not be Nie Tian's opponent. One had to know that Nie Tian had almost broken Wu Luo's blood, overarching dark world. Such battle strength was extremely terrifying. Grand Elder Xie Tian, your request is too much, Wu Luofeng frowned and said coldly. He had just seen Nie Tian's performance in the Yinmoon Forest, and he knew how terrifying Nie Tian was. He even felt that if Wu Luofeng fought against Nie Tian alone, the outcome would be uncertain. If Wu Luofeng suppressed his cultivation level, he would definitely be killed by Nie Tian in one hit. Grand Elder Xie Tian, don't worry. We will not bully Nie Tian. Let's compete with his bloodline. Wu Luofeng smiled faintly and looked at pardoning heaven Wang Chuan playfully. Compete with bloodline? Zhouqian Wang Chuan creased his eyebrows and his expression changed. Yes. Wu Luofeng nodded. He extended his palm, and 4 white jade stones appeared. Holy light bloodstones. Zhouqian Wangchuan was shocked. He immediately understood that Wu Luofeng wanted to use the holy light bloodstones to compete with Nie Tian's bloodline power. Nie Tian's expression changed when he saw the 4 pieces of white jade. He could sense that the white jade was extremely sensitive to the power of the bloodline. Moreover, the jade contained a mysterious power that was very mysterious. Great Elder Xie Tian, we are using the sacred light bloodstone to compete in terms of bloodline. This isn't considered bullying Nie Tian, right? Wu Luofeng smiled faintly and raised his eyebrows. Sure. Zhouqian Wangchuan agreed. Nie Tian, this is your first time coming into contact with the holy light bloodstone. Let me show you how to use it. Then Wu Luofeng looked at Nie Tian and smiled faintly. Then, with a flick of his palm, a surge of blood force appeared and quickly flowed into a holy light bloodstone. Swoosh! In the next instant, the sacred light bloodstone was activated and released a violent energy that soared into the sky. So powerful, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he was shocked. It turned out that this was how the sacred light bloodstone was used. A martial artist's blood force could activate the energy within the bloodstone and release a powerful attack. Brother Giji, Brother Yuwu. Then Wu Luofeng looked at the 2 martial artists, and the latter 2 stepped forward. Then Wu Luofeng smiled faintly and threw a sacred light bloodstone to Nie Tian. Nie Tian, the 3 of us will compete with you once each. If you can defeat us, you pass, he said. Nie Tian caught the sacred light bloodstone and felt the energy within it. His eyes quivered uncontrollably. Then his lips curled into a smile, and he said, How about this? We don't have to go through so much trouble. The 3 of you can fight me together. Huh? Wu Luofeng's eyes darkened, and his face instantly darkened. Nie Tian was obviously looking down on them. The 2 young martial artists from the Giji clan and the Imperial Martial clan looked gloomy too. Nie Tian wanted to fight against the 3 of them at the same time. This was a blatant humiliation. Nie Tian, don't force yourself. Zhouqian Wangchuan reacted and said. The blood force of the 4 ancient sacred clans had a certain degree of similarity. If they worked well together, they could trigger a resonance. Although it wasn't as powerful as the resonance of the same blood force, it was still terrifying. Nie Tian fighting against Wu Luofeng and the other 2 martial artists at the same time was a completely different fight. Nie Tian was too arrogant to be so arrogant. Young people are arrogant. Elder Shirtian, why stop us? Wu Luofeng smirked coldly and his face darkened. Nie Tian was arrogant now. So be it. Wu Luofeng and the other martial artist's reputation was not important. Losing the fight was more important. As long as Wu Luofeng and the other martial artists could win, it didn't matter how they won. Since Nie Tian is confident, Elder Shirtian should believe in him. Giji Longxiang smirked and said. The Imperial Martial God Yang didn't say anything. He obviously hoped that Nie Tian could fight against Wu Luofeng and the other 2 martial artists at the same time. Nie Tian, are you really confident? Zhouqian Wangchuan frowned and asked. Grand Elder, believe in me. Nie Tian smiled, and his body released a domineering confidence. Zhouqian Wangchuan nodded and chose to believe in Nie Tian. Let's begin. Nietion smiled faintly, a cold smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. Since these people were suspicious of him, he would give them a big shock. Nietion, you are asking for it. Don't blame me. Wu Luofeng smirked and stepped forward. The blood force in his body surged, and he was like a wild beast. Nietion's face was calm. However, his eyes were so deep that it was frightening. Attack! Wu Luofeng didn't waste any more time. He shouted, and the blood force in his body surged into the holy light bloodstone. Then, a violent force appeared and pressed towards Nietion. Nietion's eyes froze, and the divine demon power in his body surged. Suddenly, the holy light bloodstone in his hand trembled, and a terrifying force appeared. Bang! In the next instant, the two forces collided in the void. After a muffled sound, Wu Luofeng was forced to retreat continuously while Nietion stood in his original position like an old tree with its roots entrenched. He did not move at all. Wu Luofeng steadied his body. Although he wasn't injured, his face was red and he looked terrible. He didn't expect Nietion's blood force to be so strong. At this moment, Gue Jixing from the Giji clan made his move. The holy light bloodstone released a dark force that pressed down on Nietion. Nietion's lips twitched. The sword chi in his body surged, and the holy light bloodstone in his hand released a beam of sword light in the sky that broke through the dark force. Gue Jixing's silhouette trembled, and he retreated several steps. The blood force in Nietion's blood force now wasn't limited to the divine demon power. The heart of the sky had also become part of his blood force. Little brat, have a taste of the blood force of my martial royal clan. Following which, Yu Wuming from the martial royal clan made his move. In the air, a huge force appeared like a mountain and blasted towards Nietion. Good timing. Nietion smiled faintly, after which the dragon veins in his body started to revolve. The holy light bloodstone let out a low roar of a dragon, after which the silhouette of a dragon appeared and soared into the sky. After a muffled boom, Yu Wuming's silhouette was flung tens of meters away. The crowd was stunned by the scene in front of them. Their expressions trembled as they drew in a breath of cold air. They were speechless. Never in their wildest dreams would they have imagined that Nietion would be able to defeat Wu Luofeng and the other two so casually. What was even more terrifying was that Nietion had used 3 different types of blood force to defeat the 3 of them. Exactly how much potential was contained in Nietion's body? That's right, Nietion had used the Fiend God Origin Embryo, the Heart of the Sky, and the Sovereign Dragon Veins respectively. These 3 types of blood force were all part of his blood force. Xietian Ichi and Jiutian Wangchuan were dumbfounded as they watched from the side. They didn't dare to believe that Nietion was actually so terrifying. Join forces. At this moment, Wu Luofeng roared in a low voice, after which the silhouettes of Yu Wuming and Gue Jixing flickered. The 3 of them stood together and prepared to activate their blood force at the same time. Chapter 4017. Nie Tianling looked at Wu Luofeng and the other 2. Even if he were to face 3 ancient sacred bloodlines at the same time, he was not the least bit afraid. Could it be that he has an even more terrifying bloodline power? Xietian Ichi felt the confidence in Nietion's eyes, and his heart could not help but sink. He was extremely shocked. Clan leader, if Nietion wants to fight against Wu Luofeng and the other 2, he has to combine the 3 bloodline powers that he has displayed previously. Do you think he can do it? Jiutian Wangchuan's eyes were trembling. It was obvious that he was very nervous and his heart was in his throat. He thought that Nietion could combine the 3 bloodline powers that he had displayed earlier. Nietion's body had 3 bloodline powers that were not weaker than the ancient sacred bloodline. This was already very shocking. If he could combine the 3 bloodline powers, it would be even more frightening. His control over his own bloodline was so strong that it made people's hair stand on end. Under normal circumstances, there would only be 1 bloodline power in a martial artist's body. This was because different bloodline powers would suppress and clash with each other. For example, If the water bloodline power and the fire bloodline power existed in the same martial artist's body, the martial artist would not be able to withstand them. Even if it were two bloodline powers of the same attribute, there would be strong repulsion. It was not something that an ordinary person could withstand. Zhuqian Wanchuan was very confused. How could Nie Tian's body have three such strong bloodline powers at the same time? How could he withstand the clash of the three bloodlines? That's right. Nie Tian's martial body was far stronger than martial artists of the same level. However, the three bloodline powers that he had displayed were stronger than the ancient sacred bloodline. This clash of bloodlines was definitely not something that a strong martial body could withstand. There must be an even stronger power in Nie Tian's body that suppressed the clash of the three bloodlines. Thinking of this, Zhuqian Wanchuan's eyes could not help but tremble. The way he looked at Nie Tian changed. Other than shock, there was a clear tinge of fear. He could not imagine that a martial artist could actually be powerful to this extent. Zhuqian Wanchuan's eyes were burning. He really wanted to know what kind of power Nie Tian had in his body. As for Wu Luoxin and the rest, their eyes were trembling. They did not expect Nie Tian to be so powerful, to be able to defeat the geniuses of three ancient saint clans with just three different bloodlines. That was just too terrifying. Wu Luo's dark power, 8 desolate ghost taboo, omnidirectional imperial martial. At this moment, Wu Luofeng, Gui Jisheng, and Yu Wuming spoke at the same time. Momentarily, the power of their bloodline erupted forth, gushing into the sacred Emperor Bloodstone. Boom! In the next moment, the three holy light bloodstones rose into the air and vibrated at the same time. Three violent forces rushed out and fused together in the air, turning into a raging storm that pressed down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as he felt the violent energy rushing towards him from the void. However, he did not panic. Instead, he released the astral energy within his body, causing his entire body to glow with starlight. Boom! In the next moment, within the holy light bloodstones, a gigantic beam of starlight appeared. Instantly, the surrounding space became resplendent, and the entire heavens and earth seemed to be illuminated by the light. Bang! Immediately after, the two terrifying forces collided against each other, causing the void to tremble. In the midst of a muffled sound, a wave of energy that could be seen with the naked eye appeared and spread out in all directions. Nie Tian felt the terrifying force of the impact, and his body trembled. He took a few steps back before he could stabilize himself. On the other side, Wu Luofeng and the other two were sent flying. When they stabilized their bodies, they spat out a mouthful of blood in unison. Each of their faces was paler and uglier than the last. The three of them stared at Nie Tian, their eyes trembling. Other than shock, they were obviously filled with fear and terror. The combined attack of the three of them was actually defeated by Nie Tian. The spectators were stunned by the scene in front of them. Their faces were blank, and they couldn't react for a long time. They couldn't imagine that Nie Tian could defeat Wu Luofeng and the other two so easily. Especially the blood force that Nie Tian had used at the end, it was too terrifying. At that moment, Zhuqian Wanchuan finally knew what the even more terrifying force within Nie Tian's body was. It was an even more terrifying blood force. What shocked Zhuqian Wanchuan was that although the blood force that Nie Tian had used at the end was extremely powerful, it was very gentle and it didn't seem to have any pressure on the martial body. On the contrary, the reason why Nie Tian's multiple blood forces could coexist was because of the existence of this last blood force. Such a strange bloodline power was simply too terrifying. The blood force of the ancient holy tribe is just so. At that moment, Nie Tian took a step forward. The corners of his lips curled into a faint smile as he spoke in a sarcastic tone. Son of AB***, you are courting death. Wu Luofeng's eyes trembled. His eyes were bloodshot, and they were filled with killing intent. He suddenly roared and released the aura from his body. Like a wild beast, he charged towards Nie Tian. Since he couldn't compete with blood force, Wu Luofeng attacked directly. How dare you? However, at that moment, a deep voice rang out. Then, a huge force appeared and locked Wu Luofeng in place. Ha ha! Wu Luofeng's body froze in midair, and he couldn't move at all. Son of AB****, who gave you the courage to behave atrociously in the Bloodnet Mansion? Zhuqian Wanchuan's face was dark, and there seemed to be flames in his eyes. He glanced at Wu Luofeng. If it wasn't for the latter, he would have killed Wu Luofeng. Wu Luofeng apologized to Nie Tian now. Wu Luofeng's face was dark, and he seemed to be thinking about something. After a while, a strange light flashed across his eyes, and he shouted loudly. At that moment, he even changed the way he addressed Nie Tian. Wu Luofeng's eyes trembled and his face was as ugly as it could be. He thought for a while and finally lowered his head. He looked at Nie Tian and said, "I'm sorry, I was rash." "It's okay." Nie Tian smiled faintly and didn't say anything else. "Don't do it again." Zhuqian Wanchuan roared coldly. Then he let go of Wu Luofeng. After Wu Luofeng landed on the ground, he glared at Nie Tian. It was obvious that he was still angry. However, he didn't dare to act rashly, and he could only retreat to the side obediently. Gue Jixing and Yu Wuming were panicking, and they didn't even have the courage to look at Nie Tian. They didn't expect the foreign clan ant that they usually talked about to be so strong. "Three elders, can we enter the firmament ancient now?" Zhuqian Wanchuan smiled faintly. He glanced at Wu Luofeng and the other two elders, and his gaze was filled with provocation. Chapter 40:18. Nie Tian fought against Wu Luofeng and the other two with his star bloodline and won the battle. He was qualified to enter Firmament Ancient. At that moment, Nie Tian arrived at the outskirts of Four Sacred Mountain under the lead of Tian Ichi and the others. The mountain range before him stretched endlessly as far as the eye could see. The trees were lush and verdant, giving off a sense of vitality. This was Four Sacred Mountain, the origin of the four ancient sacred clans. It was regarded as a sacred mountain by the four ancient sacred clans. Normally, the entire Four Sacred Mountain was guarded by experts. Only those with a high status in the four ancient sacred clans could enter. However, today, Sacred Mountain would welcome a foreign martial artist. "Clan leader, let's enter." Zhuqian Wanchuan took a deep breath and prepared to enter Four Sacred Mountain. Tian Ichi nodded and was the first to enter the mountain range. Nie Tian followed closely behind. The moment he entered the mountain range, he felt his entire body being surrounded by a mysterious power. It made him feel indescribably comfortable. It seems to be some kind of natural barrier. He curled his lips and thought to himself. He was right. The entire Four Sacred Mountain was covered by a strong natural barrier. Moreover, the barrier did not suppress the martial artists at all. On the contrary, it could accelerate the circulation of the martial artists' yuan meridians and greatly increase the martial artist's cultivation speed. It was even beneficial to the martial artist's bloodline power. The martial artists of the four ancient sacred clans are cultivating in such an environment. No wonder they are so powerful. Nie Tian thought as he felt the ripple of power in the void. Although it seemed like he had won the battle with the bloodline power easily, it had not been easy at all. Especially when Wu Luofeng and the other two had teamed up, he had almost lost. After all, the bloodline power of the three ancient sacred clans was extremely powerful. If Wu Luofeng and the other two had better teamwork, Nie Tian would have been the one who had lost. Under the lead of Tian Ichi and the others, Nie Tian arrived at the core of Four Sacred Mountain very quickly. However, along the way, they had passed through countless killing formations. Furthermore, Nie Tian felt that there were many experts hiding in the surrounding space. Four Sacred Mountain was the origin of the four ancient sacred clans. It was heavily guarded. If not for Tian Ichi and the others, ordinary people would not have been able to enter. Even Fat Cat had said that the surrounding killing formations were extremely powerful. In next to no time, they arrived outside a gorge, and then Tian Ichi and the others flashed their command tokens to display their identities. However, They did not enter the valley directly. Instead, they waited outside quietly. Outsider, you are not allowed to enter Firmament Ancient. A moment later, a powerful voice came from the valley. It was like a thunderclap, causing everyone's ears to ring. Replying to the guard, this youth might be the legendary prophesied child. Our 4 races decided to bring him to the ancient sky dome for the test, Sietian Ichi said loudly as he stepped forward. There was no immediate reply from the valley. After a long while, there was finally an answer. Since this is a joint decision of the 4 races, please enter. Boom! Just as he finished speaking, a slight tremor came from the entrance of the valley. A barrier! Nietion's eyes narrowed. He realized that there was a barrier outside the valley. He did not feel it at all. What a terrifying barrier. At this time, the little fat cat couldn't help but exclaim. This barrier is extremely well hidden. Even this sovereign didn't discover it. Is this ward strong? Nietion couldn't help but ask with a frown. Yes. Fat Cat nodded and said, even a peak sky martial divine ancestor would be killed by the barrier without knowing it. This. Nietion sucked in a breath of cold air, not knowing what to say. The security of Firmament Ancient was much tighter than he had imagined. He could not help but look forward to what Firmament Ancient looked like. Then, Nietion and the others entered the valley. The entire valley was long and narrow. It was dark and gloomy. Sietian Ichi led them to the end of the valley. What appeared in front of them was not the entrance, but a huge mountain wall. Nietion couldn't help but frown, a puzzled look on his face. Nietion, follow me closely. Right at this moment, Sietian Ichi spoke in a deep voice, and then his figure flashed into the sky. Nietion came to his senses and immediately followed. Zhuqian Wanchuan and the other 3 elders also followed. Nietion and the others continued to fly up into the sky. After a while, when Nietion felt that they had reached a height of a few 100,000 meters, he suddenly felt a mysterious force appear. It was like an invisible giant hand was pulling him up. His speed instantly increased by a lot. Nietion couldn't help but panic at the sudden turn of events, causing him to cry out in alarm. Don't panic, we'll be there soon. Sietian Ichi glanced at Nietion and said with a smile. Nietion nodded and calmed down. After a short while, Nietion sensed that the invisible force began to weaken and soon disappeared. At this time, a world of clouds appeared in front of him. In the sea of clouds, a stairway could be vaguely seen. Nietion took a look. The stairway was not long, around 100 steps. Nietion, the cloud stairway you see is called the Firmament Path. Go and reach the end of the Firmament Path, Sietian Ichi said to Nietion as the group stabilized themselves. Without the slightest hesitation, Nietion flashed into action and arrived at the bottom of the Heaven Path. Following this, he took a step forward and landed on the first step of the Firmament Path. At that moment, he felt the Firmament Path emitting a powerful force that made him feel extremely tired. Nietion didn't panic. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, "It seems I'll have to walk step by step." He felt that this Firmament Path was a test of his talent and endurance. He had experienced this test many times, so it was not difficult for him. Sietian Ichi and the others stared at Nietion passionately, as if they were anticipating something. Nietion walked on the Firmament Path. Initially, his speed was fast, but the further he went, the slower his speed became. However, his figure did not stop. In the end, he finally stood at the end of the Firmament Path with difficulty. He stepped onto the Firmament Path. Zhuqian Wanchuan's eyes flickered as he exclaimed in surprise. He did not expect Nietion to step onto the Firmament Path so easily. "Everyone, let's begin." At that moment, Sietian Ichi smiled and said to the others, Wu Luoxin and the others nodded solemnly. Their expressions turned serious as they formed a seal with both hands. Waves of magical energy were released and formed runes in the air. Chapter 4019. High up in the sky of the Firmament Ancient, there was a loud rumble. A huge stone tablet appeared amidst the lingering clouds, standing at the top of the firmament like a primordial giant standing in the clouds. Heaven and earth were immediately shrouded by a vast aura. It was mysterious, solemn, ancient, and vicissitude. Under the influence of this aura, the expressions of Xie, Tian Ichi, and the others turned solemn. Pairs of eyes stared at the firmament tablet with incomparable reverence. The appearance of the firmament tablet meant that the firmament ancient had begun to acknowledge Nie Tian. Next, it would depend on the reaction of the firmament tablet to see if Nie Tian was the legendary prophecy's child. Nie Tian stood proudly at the end of the firmament ancient. As soon as the heavens monument appeared, he felt a boundless pressure, as if it was pressing down on him from all directions. He could not avoid it, and could only endure it. At that moment, his soul trembled inexplicably, as if it had resonated with some mysterious power. In the next instant, he discovered that his divine sense had arrived in a strange space-time. There was nothing around him. He just stood in the void, feeling the boundlessness of time and space. Although he knew that he had just arrived in this space-time, he had a strange feeling in his heart, as if he had been standing there for a very, very long time. How could this be? It's you? Just then, a deep voice rang out from the endless void. It sounded illusory, yet it seemed to be coming from all directions at the same time. When Yetian heard the voice, he immediately felt a roar in his head, as if his divine soul had been struck by some terrifying power. However, it did not cause him any harm, as if it was warning him. How could it be me? Nie Tian went blank for a moment, feeling confused and shocked. Judging from the voice, it seemed that it knew him. This is impossible, absolutely impossible. The illusory voice rang out again, causing the entire space to rumble. Nie Tian immediately felt his divine soul tremble violently. What is this place? Nie Tian suppressed the shock in his heart, calmed himself, and asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" No, this isn't right at all. However, the voice did not pay any attention to him. Instead, it continued speaking as if it was similarly shocked by something and felt that it was inconceivable. What's impossible? What's wrong? Nie Tian was puzzled. He had no idea what the voice was saying. He wanted to leave this place, but he discovered to his astonishment that his divine soul was shackled by a force, and he was utterly unable to leave. "Kid, what's your name?" After a short moment, the voice resounded once more, but this time it was much calmer, and it asked in a deep voice, "Nie Tian." Nie Tian raised his head and responded in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. He really wanted to know what was going on in front of him. "Nie Tian." The voice rang out once again with a hint of shock in it. It seemed to be talking to itself, as it said, "How could the first person to enter the celestial monument be you? Someone like you." Nie Tian frowned. He was confused. What was wrong with a person like him? He didn't say much and waited for the voice to continue. "Nie Tian, kid, I'd like to see what kind of power you have in your body." At that instant, the voice spoke in a deep voice. Following this, Nie Tian felt his divine soul tremble for no reason, as if an invisible giant hand was roaming around in his body. At this moment, he had a strange feeling. It was as if he was standing there naked and being scrutinized. He did not like this feeling, as it made him feel humiliated. After a short moment, the invisible giant hand disappeared, and the entire world fell into a dead silence. The voice also disappeared, as if it had never existed in the first place. Nie Tian stood on the spot and waited quietly. His divine soul seemed to be shackled here, and he couldn't get out at all. So it's like this. How could this be? Could this be heaven's will? After a long time, the voice rang out once again. It seemed to be extremely shocked, but at the same time, it seemed to have understood something. "Senior, I'd like to know what's going on." Nie Tian frowned and asked. He couldn't take it anymore. Everything before him made him feel an inexplicable sense of panic. "I didn't expect the first person to enter the heavens monument isn't the prophecy child." Following this, the voice spoke, completely ignoring Nie Tian's question. Nie Tian frowned when he heard the man's words. It turned out that he wasn't the prophecy child that Xie Tian Ichi and the others had mentioned. It seemed like the prophecy child was someone else. But it doesn't matter. Since you've come to the Heavens Monument, it means that you must be related to the 4 ancient sacred tribes in some way. Following this, the voice spoke again. Nyetian, can you tell me now, what do you need? What do I need? Nyetian was startled, as he did not expect the person to ask this. Nyetan, you're an outsider with only the strength of the Tiani Saint, yet you're able to come to the Heavens Monument. You didn't force your way in, did you? The voice sounded like it was joking. Yeah, Nyetian nodded. Without wasting any time, he went straight to the point and explained the situation he was facing. I see. They thought you were the prophecy child. No wonder they brought you here. The voice came to a realization and said with a laugh, forget it. Since you've entered the Heavens Monument, it means you're related to the 4 ancient sacred tribes. Let me ask you, do you want to be the great priest of the 4 ancient sacred tribes? Do I have a choice? Nyetian let out a wry smile and wore a helpless expression. The problem now was not whether he wanted to be the great priest, but he had to be the great priest. If he couldn't be the high priest, he would be killed by the 4 ancient holy clans. In order to survive, he had to become the great priest. It seems like the 4 ancient sacred tribes have set you up here. The voice laughed heartily and said, I can make you the great priest, but you have to promise me one thing. What is it? Nyetian's eyes narrowed as he asked nervously. Find a real prophecy child for me. The voice suddenly said in a serious tone. This? Nyetian frowned. He couldn't help but stare blankly, and a troubled expression appeared on his face. The world was vast and boundless. The sea of people rose and fell. How could he possibly find someone he didn't understand at all? He was not a person who would make promises easily. He had to be even more cautious when it came to things that he could not do. Don't worry, I will tell you how to find the prophecy child, but you have to find the prophecy child within 3 years. The voice knew what Nyetian was worried about and said in a deep voice, 3 years. Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly. This was more than enough time for him. Senior, I agree to your conditions. Nyetian agreed, without hesitation after thinking for a while. Chapter 40:20. Nyetian's divine soul returned to his body, but he stood rooted to the ground, unable to react. He raised his head and looked at the Heavens Monument in the sky, but he could not sense any aura from it. He could not help but wonder if everything that had just happened in the Heavens Monument was real, or if it was just his imagination. However, at that instant, he suddenly saw a change happening to the Heavens Monument. Boom! The Heavens Tablet let out a roar. Immediately after, it was as if an invisible giant pen was carving out dazzling golden marks on the huge tablet. This! Xietian Ichi and the others were stunned by the scene before them. Their eyes trembled, not knowing how to express the astonishment in their hearts. A moment later, a loud roar could be heard from the Heavens Monument, as 3 words were left on the giant monument. Great Priest. Great Priest. Nyetian's eyes flickered as his entire body stiffened. It was obvious that the Heavens Monument meant that he could become the great priest of the 4 tribes. Great Priest. Xietian Ichi and the others were utterly shocked when they saw the 3 words. They exclaimed in surprise before they were left in a daze. It seems like everything that happened just now was real, mumbled Nyetian as he collected his thoughts. He's really the prophecy child. At that instant, Juqian Wangchuan let out a scream as his eyes stared at Nyetian in awe. The prophecy child, this kid is the prophecy child. Wu Luoxin and the others reacted at the same time as they exclaimed in astonishment. The disbelief in their hearts was written all over their faces. The Heavens Monument had changed, acknowledging Nyetian's identity as the great priest. Without a doubt, he was the legendary prophecy child. I'm not the prophecy child. I'm the one who's looking for the prophecy child. Nyetian became cold as he glanced at Xietian Ichi and the others, before letting out a wry laugh in his heart. It was not a bad thing for him that Xietian Ichi and the others had mistaken him for the prophecy child. Thus there was no need for him to explain himself. Nyetian, don't forget our agreement. At that moment, the voice rang out in Nyetian's mind once again. I've already left a prophecy seal on your palm. When you meet the child of the prophecy, the prophecy seal will naturally react. Prophecy Holy Seal. Nietion's gaze trembled slightly as he opened his palm. Sure enough, he saw a dense cluster of runes on his palm. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that the runes actually contained an extremely powerful force. Nietion, remember, you only have 3 years. You must find the child of the prophecy within 3 years. After that, the voice resounded, and it actually carried a threatening aura. 3 years, Nietion murmured as his lips curled into a faint smile. It shouldn't be difficult for him to find someone within 3 years. He could sense the threat in the voice. Thus, he was very curious as to what would happen if he failed to find the child of the prophecy child within 3 years. The prophecy seal can only exist for 3 years. You must return within 3 years, or else you will perish along with the prophecy seal. The voice said in a deep voice, each word shocking Nietion. This! Nietion's eyes flickered as he finally understood the meaning of the prophecy seal. It turned out that the prophecy seal was not only helping him find the child of the prophecy child, but it was also a sword hanging above his head. If he failed to find the child of the prophecy seal within 3 years, the sword hanging above his head would fall and take his life. One could not help but admit that the person inside the sky monument truly had some tricks up his sleeves. Nietion, before you find the child of the prophecy child, you will temporarily assume his identity. Following this, the voice spoke with a deep chuckle. Following this, the sky monument shuddered in the air and disappeared. Nietion frowned as he stared at the place where the sky monument had disappeared. His eyes were trembling, and he was unable to react for a long time. It seemed like he would have to spend the next 3 years in a hurry again. After a while, he calmed down and flew down from the sky path, arriving beside Ichi and the others. Nietion, oh no, Grand Priest. Jiutian Wanchuan looked at Nietion, his eyes burning with excitement. He asked in surprise, "How do you feel now?" "I feel great." Nietion smiled faintly and did not mention what had happened inside the sky monument. The voice had already asked him to temporarily assume the identity of the child of the prophecy child. Grand Priest. At this moment, the Imperial War Divine Son took a step forward and arrived before Nietion. His voice was slightly trembling, and it was obvious that he was also very excited. "What happened just now? I don't know either." Nietion shook his head and said with a smile, "My soul seemed to have entered the sky monument, and I heard a voice saying something. After that, I came out and saw the words Grand Priest on the sky monument." He had only described it briefly. Of course, it was impossible for him to explain everything in detail. Human ruler, firmament emperor. Ichi's eyes flickered when he heard Nietion's words, and he exclaimed in shock. The others were stunned and confused. Rumor has it that the sky monument was left behind by the human ruler, the firmament emperor. His soul is inside the sky monument. Ichi's eyes were trembling as he said, "I think that the voice that appeared in the sky monument belonged to the human ruler, the firmament emperor." The others' eyes were trembling, and they were so shocked that they could not speak. Who would have thought that Nietion had just communicated with the human ruler? Human ruler? Nietion frowned, and his expression did not look good. He did not know if the voice belonged to the human ruler, but the fact that this person had used the prophecy seal to trick him made him rather unhappy. "Clan leader, let's leave this place." Nietion glanced at the crowd and said with a smile. Since these people had acknowledged his identity as the Grand Priest, there was no point in staying any longer. "All right," Ichi agreed and left with the crowd. Along the way Wei Wu Luoxin and the rest looked at Nietion was obviously different. Apart from shock, there was also unconcealable respect. At that moment, they believed that Nietion was the one in the prophecy, and they had also acknowledged Nietion's identity as the Grand Priest. As Nietion was the Grand Priest of the 4 clans, it was no exaggeration to say that his current status was the highest among the 4 ancient sacred clans. He was even higher than the 4 clan leaders and the 4 great elders. Soon, Nietion and the rest returned to Tion City and arrived outside the Blood Cloud Manor. at that moment. And yet Tion's expression changed all of a sudden, and he could not help but exclaim as if he had sensed something. He was shocked, and he could not help but clench his fists. He simply couldn't believe that the prophecy sage seal in his hand was actually reacting. The voice had said that the prophecy seal would react when it encountered the prophecy child.